Chapter 719. Xiao Xian listened to He Bian talk about a lot of things, mainly about the customs of the Di Mountain tribe. He Bian was still very cautious when it came to the secrets of the tribe. However, Xiao Xian already had a basic understanding of the tribe. All in all, the Di Mountain tribe was a tribe that would rather live with fish than interact with humans. Their main source of food was the wild fruits in the forest and the fish in the sea. Compared to the land and rivers, they preferred the boundless blue ocean. Their understanding of the fish and sea beasts in the sea was much greater than that of the land. They didn't use nets often and rarely made complicated stone tools. They preferred harpoons made from horn stones or the bones and shells of other sea creatures as weapons. Horn stones were the horns that Xiao Xian saw the Di Mountain tribesmen wearing. They were actually a type of animal that lived in the sea. Its shape and material were very suitable for making weapons, so the Di Mountain tribesmen would often look for horn stones when they were catching fish in the sea. Some horn stones were much bigger than a human's body length. What was special about the Di Mountain tribe was that they were good at diving. Perhaps it was because they lived by the sea and their physique, but they were good at swimming and diving. They could dive deeper than other tribes. Even the Ji tribe couldn't compare to them. The sea was the Di Mountain tribesmen's main hunting ground. When Xiao Xian heard He Bian talk about how they hunted in the sea, he felt that the Di Mountain tribe was indeed more suited to the sea. As for the Di fish that Xiao Xian was interested in, He Bian tried to draw it. However, compared to the totem, the fish he drew didn't look like a fish at all. Xiao Xian temporarily gave up on trying to understand what the Di fish looked like from He Bian. However, when He Bian mentioned the Di fish, he had a complicated expression on his face. He wouldn't tell Xiao Xian exactly why. After He Bian left, Xiao Xian chatted with a few of the injured members of the Di Mountain tribe. He casually mentioned the Di fish, but these people were different from He Bian. Their feelings towards the Di fish weren't as complicated as He Bian's. They completely treated the Di fish as their true companions. This was an idea passed down from their ancestors. They had been taught this since they were young. However, there must be another secret behind this, and it must be related to the Di fish. On the other side, Guizhe finished talking to the child in the shell. Because the child said that his condition would be better in the water, Guizhe asked someone to prepare a large stone vat. Ever since pottery became popular in the tribe, stone tools were gradually used less and less. Guizhe asked someone to find an empty stone vat and fill it with river water. Then, he asked He Bian and the others to put the child in. Seawater is still different from river water, but having water is good. It's better than being in a shell all the time, Xiao Xian said. Although the child in the shell did not show it, it could be seen that she was in pain. It was impossible for her body to fester without her noticing. He Bian and the others said that when they were still in the Di Mountain tribe, they would dig a big hole and let the sick children stay in it. They would get fresh seawater every day. During this long journey, the shaman thought of putting Dian in a shell. Before they set off, the shell was filled with seawater, but on the way, the seawater gradually disappeared. With the Di Mountain tribesmen taking care of Dian, they did not have to worry too much about Yanjiao. Although the Di Mountain tribesmen were anxious, they were still well behaved. How did it go on your side? Xiao Xian asked Guizhe. He briefly told him what he found out from He Bian, but he felt that Guizhe would definitely be able to get more information from the child. That child. Guizhe seemed to have encountered a difficult problem. She is the next shaman of the Di Mountain tribe, if she survives. The child did not hide this from Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian realized that there were many things that He Bian did not know. Perhaps He Bian had noticed it, but he did not know more about it. This was a team that came all the way here to find a cure. It was impossible for everyone to be clueless. That was why there was at least one person in this team who knew the truth. If He Bian, who was the leader of this team, was not that person, then who else had a higher status than He Bian? Now he knew. No wonder He Bian and the others valued that child so much. After all, they were raising her as the next shaman. This was something that Guizhe deeply understood. That child knows her own condition very well. She didn't hide anything from me and told me everything. Just as we guessed, the cause of her illness is the conflict between the two totemic powers in her body, Guizhe said. What is her attitude towards the D-fish? Xiao Xian suddenly asked. That's the strange thing. Xian, tell me, He Bian's attitude towards the D-fish is very complicated. The other D tribesmen seem to be very close to the D-fish, but when the child talks about the D-fish, her gaze is guarded. Guizhe did not understand this. Because she was familiar with the drumming tribe, she initially thought that the D mountain tribe was similar to the drumming tribe. The drumming tribesmen also saw crocodiles as their companions. However, none of the drumming tribesmen treated crocodiles differently. She still has many things that she hasn't told us, Xiao Xian said. When we were talking to her, she asked everyone to leave. It seems like there are some things that she doesn't want others to know, including He Bian. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. She's observing and probing. If we don't have a solution, or if we don't want to interfere, she won't say anything else. Guizhe nodded. She asked if we could extract one of the totemic powers from her body. I can't think of a solution for this at the moment. After all, I've never seen anyone with two types of totemic powers. Extract one. Xiao Xian also didn't know how to extract one of the two types of powers from his body. His situation was special too. Other than Yan Zhao's fire seed and totemic power, there was another type of power in his body. However, unlike the D mountain tribesmen, the two types of powers in his body did not conflict with each other. In fact, most of the time, Yan Zhao's fire seed and totemic power would become more active under the influence of the other type of power. Next time, when you go look for that child, I'll go too. I have some questions for her. Xiao Xian could tell that the child was closer to Guizhe, probably because she was the successor of the shaman. Other than Guizhe, she didn't want to talk to anyone else. Xiao Xian wanted to ask Guizhe to pass the message, but after thinking about it, he decided that it would be better for him to ask her personally. They could totally ignore the D mountain tribesmen's situation, but Xiao Xian was very curious about the cause of the D mountain tribesmen. Besides Xiao Xian, Guizhe and the two retired shamans also had the same thought. They also wanted to know the cause and the solution. Anything related to the fire seed always piqued the shaman's interest. On this day, Xiao Xian went to the place where the D mountain tribesmen were settled down. The D mountain tribesmen treated Guizhe much better than Xiao Xian. This was because the shaman was the absolute leader in the D mountain tribe. The chief was only secondary. It wasn't rare to see a tribe like this, so Xiao Xian wasn't surprised. When he walked over, he heard laughter coming from inside. The stone vat was placed in the middle of the room, and the large shell was still in its original position. It was open, but there was no longer any water inside. Perhaps it was because the child was soaking in the water, so the smell in the room wasn't as strong as it was on the first day. Just like the first day, the child was wearing clothes made from the skin of a type of sea fish. There were a few fish in the large stone tank that the D mountain tribesmen had caught in the flaming river themselves. They said it was for the child to play with. What was the most abundant fish in the flaming river? Piranhas. Yes, the toys the D mountain tribesmen had caught for the child were the famous piranhas in the flaming river. They were the kind that were very active before their teeth were pulled out. The three fish in the vat weren't big. They were about the size of an adult's palm. After all, there was a limit to how big they could fit in the vat. If it were anyone else, they would definitely be attacked by the three piranhas in the vat. No matter how big or small they were born to be vicious. But now, the three piranhas that were so arrogant in the flaming river were like little chicks being chased. They dodged the human's palm, even if the human's palm was much smaller than theirs. The laughter Xiao Xian heard came from the child in the water as she slapped the piranhas in the vat. It seemed like she was very satisfied with this toy. If the Ji tribesmen didn't have the crocodiles to protect them, they might not even be able to do this. However, this child in front of him did it. Xiao Xian wondered if it was because of the child's illness that the piranhas were avoiding her. Or was it because all the D Mountain tribesmen could do this? When she saw Xiao Xian and Guizhe walk in, the child called Dian Dian stopped slapping the fish. The water in the stone vat calmed down, but the three piranhas were still trying their best to stay away. They were practically sticking to the walls of the stone vat. If there was a gap in the wall, they would probably jump out through it. Chapter 720. Seeing Guizhe walk in, the child in the stone tank grinned at Guizhe. However, because her face was also festering, she looked even scarier than the drumming tribesmen when they smiled. Only her eyes were still bright, like the reflection of Yangguang on the surface of the sea. As for Xiao Xian, he was like a backdrop. The child called Dian Dian only glanced at him casually and didn't look at him anymore. She looked at him the same way she looked at everyone else. "How do you feel today?" Guizhe went over to take a closer look at Dian Dian in the stone tank. "I'm much better." Her young voice didn't change because of her illness. If you only heard her voice, you wouldn't think that her illness was so serious. He Bian and the others looked at Guizhe nervously. When the child lowered her head to look at the fish in the stone tank, Guizhe shook his head at them. He Bian and the others' expectant gazes immediately dimmed. They were filled with disappointment and sorrow. The shamaness told them to come here to find a solution, but if they couldn't find a cure even here, where could they go to find an answer? Or was the place the shamaness was talking about not here, but somewhere else upstream? They heard that Yanjiao's stone bridge was built after they moved here. It didn't originally exist on the Flaming River. If it wasn't for this stone bridge, they wouldn't have been stopped and this wouldn't be the end. The D tribesmen who came here had a private discussion about whether they should stay or leave. They still couldn't come to a conclusion. Some said that this was definitely not the place the shamaness was talking about. They shouldn't waste time here and should continue upstream. However, the other half thought this was the place. After all, the Yanjiao people said there would be fewer tribes upstream. Plus, Yanjiao was the strongest tribe in this area. He Bian was frustrated. He couldn't decide. After all, no matter what they chose, if they made the wrong choice, they wouldn't have the chance to regret it. They might even be wiped out by the D tribe. Maybe you should ask Dian Dian. He Bian looked over at the stone vat. Dian Dian was still playing with the three fishes in the stone vat. From time to time, it would answer Guizhe's questions. Although Dian Dian said that she was much better, it was only compared to the torment she felt when she was in the shell during the long journey. Soaking in the stone vat and being able to move freely was of course much better than being in the shell. However, if one were to look at her body, they would find that her festering condition had worsened compared to when she had just come out of the shell. Xiao Xian squatted down so that he was at eye level with the person inside. "I have a few questions to ask." After he finished speaking, Xiao Xian looked at He Bian and the others at the door. Dozens of pairs of eyes stared at Xiao Xian cautiously. They could allow the shaman Guizhe to talk to Dian Dian alone, but they couldn't allow anyone else to do so. Moreover, Xiao Xian was a man. Who knew what would happen if they left him here? Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry. He waited for the person in the stone vat to make a decision. He knew that this child actually knew everything. In the stone vat, Dian Dian's movements slowed down. She lowered her head and seemed to be thinking seriously. After a while, she raised her head and looked at He Bian and the others. "He Bian, stay here. The rest of you, leave." The D Mountain people didn't seem to think that there was anything wrong with calling He Bian by his name. She didn't have the respect that other tribesmen had for their chief. It wasn't hard to imagine how important this child was to the D Mountain people. Even if she was only going to be the next shaman, and even if her condition was serious, it didn't affect her status. He Bian wanted to persuade her again, but he knew that once the person in the stone vat made a decision, it would be hard to change her mind. He could only wave his hand and signal for the others to leave and not eavesdrop. When there were only 4 people left in the room, He Bian closed the doors and windows. When Yanjiao built houses, they used wood that was more soundproof. For this reason, they compared many different types of wood and finally settled on this one. It was also a type of wood that grew in the mountains and forests of Yanjiao. The noise outside faded away, and the room quieted down. Jian Jian, you have 2 totemic powers in your body. That's why you're sick. This also means that the D Mountain tribe has 2 fire seeds. In the quiet room, Xiao Xian's calm voice was like a bolt of lightning. He Bian froze on the spot. When he regained his senses, He Bian couldn't help but refute, how can there be 2 fire seeds? You're lying. Previously, when Xiao Xian asked him this question, He Bian thought it was ridiculous. He didn't have any common sense and was just spouting nonsense. But now, after He Bian shouted, he realized that Jian Jian was still silent. She didn't refute him. He looked back and forth between the person in the stone vat and Xiao Xian and Guizhe. He Bian's jaw dropped. He couldn't hide the shock on his face. When he saw that the person in the stone vat didn't say anything, Xiao Xian continued. The other fire seed is the D fish, right? On the other side, He Bian, who was already standing there in shock, jumped up when he heard this news. However, he didn't shout this time. Instead, he looked at the person in the stone vat. The person in the stone vat finally raised her head and looked at Xiao Xian. Her eyes were filled with shock. She didn't expect Xiao Xian to know about this. She was silent, but she didn't refute him. It's true. He Bian's lips trembled. His tanned face turned gray. Although he knew some things that others didn't and his feelings towards the D fish were complicated, he didn't expect it to be like this. The D fish had a fire seed. Why didn't they notice it before? Where was the fire seed? This was unbelievable. It was completely beyond their knowledge. Xiao Xian had told Guizhe about this before they came. Guizhe was also shocked for a long time. Now that he saw Jian Dian's reaction, Xiao Xian's guess was proven to be true. Jian Jian looked at the water in the stone vat again and reached out to the fish. A long, long time ago, the ancestors of the D Mountain came to D Mountain with the help of the D fish and established the D Mountain tribe. At the same time, they treated the D fish as a gift from the gods. The descendants of the D Mountain tribe also treated the D fish with respect. If any of the D Mountain tribesmen died, the ancestors would pass their bodies to the D fish. The ancestors said that the D fish would bring the tribesmen to a better place. Yes, this was a story passed down from generation to generation. He Bian had been brainwashed by this story since he was young. They never doubted anything because the D fish would indeed help them. When they ran out of food, the D fish would bring fish back from the sea and throw them ashore. If the D Mountain tribesmen were in danger in the sea, the D fish would also help. The D Mountain tribesmen would also help the D fish. When the D fish was in trouble, the D Mountain tribesmen would do their best to help them. This seemed to be a mutually beneficial relationship. However, after He Bian took over the position of chief, he saw different ideas in the notes of the previous chiefs. Most of the notes were from the last few hundred years. They all had different ideas, but they could be summed up in one sentence. They had to be wary of the D fish. Otherwise, the D Mountain tribe would be wiped out. Actually, a similar illness had appeared in the tribe a long time ago. Perhaps it was at that time that the D Mountain tribe's ancestors felt that something was wrong. However, the only person who knew the key to this was the shamaness. He Bian didn't know why the shamaness kept this from him. Maybe she was suspicious and felt that this idea was disrespectful. Or maybe there were other reasons. After all, the chief wasn't the shamaness. In the D Mountain tribe, a chief like He Bian didn't know much. He didn't know the truth. Now, more and more people were falling sick, but most of the D Mountain tribesmen didn't link this illness to the D fish. But now, what was this Yanjiao head elder saying? The D fish was the cause of this strange illness in their tribe? The person in the stone tank didn't look at the reactions of the other 3 people in the room. She continued to play with the 3 fish in the water. 700 years ago, the first person in the D Mountain tribe fell sick. He couldn't be cured, so he jumped into the sea where the D fish lived. However, the D-fish pushed him ashore. According to the ancestral notes, the D-fish surrounded that person. After they pushed him ashore, they didn't leave for a long time. It wasn't until that person passed away that the D-fish took him and sank into the sea. He Bien's eyelids twitched. He had heard these stories before. Every time his elders and the people around him talked about this story, they would express their gratitude and say that the D-fish really protected them. Even when they were sick and couldn't see the person's face, they still wouldn't bring them into the sea. The D-fish really treated the D-mountain tribesmen well. But now, when he heard Jian Jian talk about it, he felt a chill down his spine. He Bian felt a chill down his spine. The bad feeling was getting stronger and stronger. After that, the same illness would appear in the tribe every few decades. The children who had just awakened their totemic powers couldn't be cured and died soon after. The longest they could live was 2 years. Later on, the illness appeared more frequently and more people fell sick. This time, it reached its peak. The shamaness said that the D-fish had started to act. Their fire seed was strong enough. Why didn't they kill them when they knew the cause? Kill them. He Bian was agitated. The muscles on his face were trembling. His eyes were filled with hatred and madness. His expression was ferocious. It's too late. It's hard to separate the two fire seeds now. If we act rashly, the D-fish might attack us. After all, the D-fish can come ashore. Also, if we fight them directly, the D-mountain fire seed will be severely damaged. Before we came out this time, the shamaness said that we don't have enough time. Either we win or we die. But before we reach the end, the shamaness hopes that there will be another solution. The person in the stone tank lowered her head and stared at the fish inside. He Bian thought of the ancestors of the D-mountain. They had been listening to their ancestors since they were young and had been instilled with their thoughts. Even if they were shamans, not every generation had the same thoughts. Even if they noticed the abnormality, they would hesitate and hesitate for a long time. By the time they finally made a decision, it was already too late. For almost 100 years, the shamaness of the D-mountain had been looking for a solution, but it was to no avail. This time, the shamaness said that she finally found a solution. She said that she had to follow the river that connected the tribe to the sea until she couldn't go any further. Jian Jian looked at He Bian. Do you know how the D-mountain's totem came about? He Bian looked like he was about to break down. He shook his head. Jian Jian looked at Xiao Xian and He Bian. Can I borrow a brush? Xiao Xian took out the brush and a blank piece of cloth that he always carried with him. The brush holder was already filled with paint. This was Xiao Xian's homemade brush, so he could directly write after pulling out the cap. Jian Jian looked at the brush in her hand. Then, she leaned against the side of the stone tank and let He Bian hold the cloth. When the D-mountain was first built, their totem looked like this. Jian Jian drew a strange human face on He Bian's left palm. However, it was different from the face that Xiao Xian saw. It looked like a pair of glasses. As Jian Jian continued to draw, Xiao Xian noticed more differences. The fins and tails around the human face were much smaller than the rest of the human face. After she finished drawing, Jian Jian continued drawing on He Bian's right palm. Now, the D-mountain's totem looks like this. The second drawing was similar to He Bian's. It was also what Xiao Xian saw on the big shell. The human face was smaller. There were more lines on the face. It looked even weirder. The fins and tails were bigger. Also, there were a few more strokes on the other side of the human face. If they didn't see the first drawing, it would be hard to notice the difference in the second drawing. Every generation of D-mountain people only recognized the totem during the ceremony. Most of the time, they saw it in the fire pit. They thought that it was what they needed to remember. If they remembered it wrongly, they would correct it. Jian Jian didn't stop there. She pulled the cloth and continued to draw after the second drawing. If this continues, the future totem will look like this. As she drew the third drawing, He Bian's hands trembled even more. On the third totem painting, the proportion of the human face was not much different from the second totem. However, on the other side of the human face, Xiao Xian felt that there were a few extra strokes, and now it was all filled up. It was a fish mouth. On one side of the human face was a fish tail. On the other side was a fish mouth. It looked like it was swallowing the human face. The D Mountain Tribe's totem has changed from the combined totem to the swallow totem. He Bian's expression turned even uglier. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. His voice trembled as he said, "They are swallowing the D Mountain's fire seed." Chapter 721. Could a fearsome beast have a fire seed? Yes. The existence of the king's stoneworm and the bat leader told Xiao Xian that fearsome beasts could have a fire seed too. He even told the Yanjiao people about this. That was why Guizhe and the others weren't as shocked as the D people. However, this was the first time they heard of a fearsome beast devouring a human tribe's fire seed. Even though Gigu and the others weren't interested in this matter at first, they still wanted to find out more. How would the D people deal with this situation? How would they fight back? Would they fight them head-on or use other tactics? He Bian's mind was in a mess. He was already on his guard against the D fish, but the beliefs of the D people that had been passed down for thousands of years were crumbling. It wasn't easy to accept this. No matter how strong He Bian was, he couldn't remain calm at this moment. Beliefs and inheritances, especially things passed down by their ancestors, were rarely doubted or questioned by tribesmen, let alone overturn them. This was also why the D Mountain tribesmen didn't say anything even though they realized something was wrong. In the world of the tribesmen, it was too difficult to make a decision like this. It wasn't easy to make the Yanjiao people doubt their ancestors. Xiao Xian once joked that if Yanjiao's ancestors said there was only one moon in the sky, the Yanjiao people would believe them too. Seeing is believing. Most of the time, seeing was believing, but it was not necessarily more effective than believing in their ancestors. This was the tribesmen. Even if something was right, it still needed time to be accepted. It was during this process that the D Mountain people encountered all kinds of difficulties and ended up in their current state. How can there be two rulers in one place at the same time? The child in the stone vat said with a hint of sarcasm. In the beginning, the ancestors of D Mountain probably wanted to coexist with the D fish. However, time had proven that they were too naive. Even if they were just fish, they were fish that possessed the power of the fire seed. Fearsome beasts weren't necessarily stupid. They could even be more cunning, smarter, more ambitious, and more far-sighted than humans. Now, they were constantly eating away at D Mountain's fire seed. The cost of fusing two different types of fire seeds was too great. Time and the lives of generations of tribesmen were not something that most tribes were willing to pay. If they had the energy, they would rather expand their territory and snatch resources. However, those fishes did it. As they gradually devoured the power that did not belong to them, they fused it for their own use. Then what should we do? He Bian's lips trembled. He didn't know if it was out of fear or hatred. He hated that the D fish would do something like this. He was afraid that their tribe would disappear from this world. In the tribesmen's minds, if their fire seed was taken away, they would be gone. Jian, what should we do? If we can't find a solution here, should we continue marching up the flaming river? He Bian asked anxiously. There's no need to go upstream. Jian continued to play with the piranhas in the stone tank. Her voice was calm. If we can't find a solution here in Yanjiao, then we'll go back. Go. Go back. What about you? You. He Bian stared at the person in the stone tank. He couldn't finish his sentence. The person in the stone tank looked up at He Bian. There wasn't much emotion in her eyes. She looked cold and determined. Go back. I'll carve something on the shell. Bring it back and tell the tribesmen that the D people and the D fish will fight or die. Even the shamaness couldn't convince everyone in the D tribe. But what if she added fuel to the fire? Jian, you and the shamaness. He Bian stared blankly at the person in the stone tank. He wasn't stupid. Compared to the others, he was much smarter. He Bian wasn't outstanding in the D tribe. He was even naughty and mischievous when he was young. However, the shamaness chose him to be the chief because he wasn't dumb. He knew how to think on his own and had his own standards. He might not be able to do what the shamaness wanted him to do, but compared to the others, he was the best choice. Perhaps the shamaness had already expected this day to come when she chose the chief. The shamaness said that we'll find a solution if we follow the flaming river upstream. Is this true? He Bian's voice trembled even more. Jian, who was in the stone vat, revealed a rare look of surprise. Then, she revealed a smile. The smile could no longer be seen on her face because of the festering, but the smile in her eyes was obvious. Jian thought to herself that the shamaness had chosen the right person. It was already rare for her to think this far. Seeing Dian's reaction, He Bian's entire body started to tremble. If there really wasn't a solution, the shamaness did say that there was a solution. It's true, but we're not sure. That's why we have another choice. The first half of Dian's words made He Bian sigh in relief, but the second half was like a death sentence. He Bian had already guessed what the other choice was. Jian probably didn't want to come back alive this time. That was why she was so calm. This was related to the survival of the tribe. They couldn't place all their hopes on one path. If they couldn't find a way out of this, they had to prepare another path. The other path was also their last chance. They could only fight. However, if they really fought, the D fish wouldn't hold back. They grew up eating D people. Even if they only ate dead people, they were still D people. What should the D mountain tribe do when faced with the ferocious D fish? Their fire seed was already trapped there by the D fish's fire seed. They couldn't move. If they really fought, how could the D mountain tribe win if they still had their hands tied? Most of the time, changing one's mind required time and blood. The latter could cause a greater impact in a short period of time, especially when it was something deeply ingrained in the tribesmen's minds. If they didn't pay the price, they would never be able to wake them up. The people who brought Jian out were all chosen by the shamaness. They were trustworthy. If there wasn't a solution, then Jian wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. When they returned, she would only be a corpse. He Bian and the others would bring Dian's corpse back. They would also bring Dian's words on the shell to the tribesmen. That was the solution. Perhaps this would shake the stubborn tribesmen's minds. They wouldn't be a burden to their comrades in battle. Dian's status in the D mountain tribe was very high. Perhaps she was second only to the shamaness. Because of this, her words would definitely change some people's minds. This was a typical shamaness. She always liked to solve problems through thoughts, knowledge and beliefs. He Bian was already choking on his sobs. He didn't know what to say, but when he was agitated, his accent came out. Xiao Xian couldn't understand what he meant. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Cough. Xiao Xian broke the heavy silence. I don't know how to extract the other totemic power. These two powers are already very tightly entangled. You can feel it yourself. It's extremely difficult to do. If you try to force it, it might even endanger your life. However, have you tried swallowing the D fish's fire seed instead? Chapter 722. As soon as Xiao Xian said this, He Bian, who had been mumbling to himself, looked at him as if he was an idiot. Of course, they had thought about devouring the D mountain tribe's fire seed. However, how many years had passed since the D mountain tribe's fire seed was devoured? How many generations had it been since the D mountain tribe's fire seed was devoured? Did they even have the time? I'm not saying what you think. Xiao Xian explained, of course, I know that devouring and merging with the D mountain tribe's fire seed takes a long time. However, what I'm trying to say is that you can take the fire seed that belongs to you into your own body first. Then, you can slowly fight with the D Mountain Tribe's fire seed. Take it into our own body? He Bian didn't understand what Xiao Xian meant. Even Jian Jian, who was playing with her fish, looked at Xiao Xian curiously. Guizhe understood what Xiao Xian meant when he heard Xiao Xian's words. That's right. Although this method isn't completely safe, it's much better than what you just said. According to what you said, there are actually two types of fire seeds in the D Mountain Tribe's fire pond. It's just that the two types of fire seeds are mixed together. Many of you can't tell the difference. After all, the D Mountain Tribe's fire seed was able to grow to its current size because it devoured the D Mountain Tribe's fire seed. Therefore, it's understandable that you can't tell the difference. However, even if it's hard to tell, they are still two different types of fire seeds. You can use the parts that haven't been devoured to stop the D Mountain Tribe from devouring them. Xiao Xian saw that He Bian and Jian Jian were listening to him, so he continued, the two types of fire seeds are mixed together in the fire pond. If you want to move them, it's not up to you to decide. Unless both sides agree, the D Mountain Tribe will definitely not agree. This means that you won't be able to move your fire seed in the short term. Instead of fighting right now, why don't you merge the fire seed that still belongs to the D Mountain Tribe into your own body? That way, the D Mountain Tribe won't be able to snatch it away from you. Also, a totemic warrior who has merged with a fire seed will still be stronger than a totemic warrior who hasn't merged with a fire seed. Fire seed, fuse into our bodies? To He Bian and Jian Jian, this kind of saying was rather novel, and they didn't even think about it. Actually, you should be able to sense that Yanjiao doesn't have a primitive fire seed, Xiao Xian said. He Bian only realized now because he was worried about his tribe and Jian Jian, so he didn't pay much attention to it. The D tribesmen didn't interact with the outside world on a daily basis. Even when they traveled up the flaming river, they tried their best to avoid other people. They had forgotten what it felt like to be rejected by fire seeds from different tribes. Even though Jian Jian was being trained as the next shaman, her experience was limited. She had never experienced the intense rejection of the fire seed. What she knew was limited to the theoretical knowledge taught by the shaman. Now that Xiao Xian mentioned it, she remembered that there was indeed such a thing. Primordial fire seed? Jian Jian caught hold of this term for the first time. Yes. For example, the fire seed that you D Mountain people put in your fire pond is a primitive fire seed. However, the fire pond in Yanjiao doesn't have a primitive fire seed. How is that possible? He Bian's worldview was refreshed once again. It had only been a short while today, but he had already been rejected multiple times. Nothing is impossible. Blood and fire come from the same source. Now, many tribes on this mainland have merged with a primitive fire seed. The big tribes have already done so, and the small and medium tribes are following closely behind. The D Mountain people don't interact with the outside world and live far away, so you don't know about this. This isn't news anymore. If you don't believe me, you can go to the Flaming River trading point and ask around. On the other side of the stone bridge, there is a large trading point built by Yanjiao. He Bian's jaw dropped. He didn't know how to react. However, he knew that the Yanjiao head elder's words were probably true. The D Mountain people didn't like to interact with other tribes and lived in a remote area. If the other tribes didn't know about the merging of fire seeds, the D Mountain people definitely wouldn't know. Jian Jian, who was in the stone vat, showed a rare look of excitement. Can it really be merged? If they couldn't separate the fire seeds that were mixed together, then what about directly merging the parts that belonged to them? Now that they thought about it, it wasn't impossible. Perhaps the solution the shamaness mentioned really existed. Thinking up to this point, Jian Jian tried to climb out of the stone vat, but He Bian pressed her down. It was better for him to ask for help. Hence, before Xiao Xian could speak, He Bian fell to his knees. Head elder, please save our D Mountain. Before this, He Bian had already told Gigu that as long as they could help the D Mountain people, they would do their best to help. Even if it was a rare treasure at the bottom of the sea, they would do their best to find it. Get up first. I'm not done talking, Xiao Xian said helplessly. Oh. He Bian got up and leaned against the stone vat. He looked straight at Xiao Xian and waited for Xiao Xian to continue. When Xiao Xian was done, he would continue begging. As long as he could get Yanjiao to help, begging didn't matter. So what if he lost face? It didn't matter. What I want to add is that the D Mountain people's situation is special. We can't predict what will happen during the merging process. Even without your complicated situation, the merging process is still very risky. Xiao Xian told him about the tribes that had failed to merge their fire seeds. He Bian hesitated when he heard about the risks, but Dian Dian, who was in the stone vat, was very excited. Her eyes were shining brightly. Use this. Use this method. I believe this is the best solution. He Bian opened his mouth, but he remained silent. He couldn't change Dian Dian's mind. Can you teach us how to merge our fire seeds? Dian Dian asked expectantly. I can only tell you the things you need to pay attention to when merging a primitive fire seed under normal circumstances. You will have to figure out the rest based on the D Mountain people's situation, Xiao Xian said. Dian Dian stood up with difficulty and bowed to Xiao Xian. She said solemnly, "Thank you." He Bian hurriedly supported Dian Dian. At this time, Dian Dian needed a lot of energy just to stand up. She had been lying in the stone vat all day long. Only her hands were slightly better. Xiao Xian looked at Dian Dian, who was lying back down in the stone vat with difficulty. He asked, "Can I take a look at your totemic power?" As he spoke, Xiao Xian pointed at his head. He meant the totemic power in her mindscape. No way. He Bian quickly objected. It wasn't that there was a difference between a man and a woman. It was mainly because they belonged to different tribes, had different fire seeds, and had different totemic powers. Recklessly invading her mindscape would cause a strong rejection. Dian Dian's body was already in a critical condition. If this happened, wouldn't she die? Alright. Dian Dian didn't reject him. From her point of view, Xiao Xian was willing to help and teach the D Mountain people how to merge their fire seed. This request was only for him to understand the situation. Perhaps he would give some important suggestions and opinions after seeing it. That way, it would be beneficial for the D Mountain people to merge their fire seed. As for herself, she didn't want to go back alive. She was already satisfied if she could contribute more to the tribe before she died. He Bian was so excited that he wanted to speak to the D Mountain people again. However, he was stopped by Dian Dian's words. He could only squat at the side with a bitter expression. He looked at Xiao Xian nervously. Xiao Xian walked over and asked, "Are you ready?" "I'm ready." Dian Dian was very calm. Guizhe consciously took a few steps back and tried to distance himself from her. She had the aura of the Yinjiao fire seed on her. If he got too close, it would affect her. When he saw Guizhe move, He Bian thought that he had to do it. He also retreated to the door and stood guard. Guizhe wanted to tell He Bian that Xiao Xian was a special case in Yanjiao. He wouldn't be rejected by the fire seed. She had to stay away from him because of her fire seed. However, as a D Mountain person, he didn't have to stay so far away. However, when he saw how nervous He Bian was, he didn't say anything. He Bian leaned against the door and clenched his fists. He stared at the Yanjiao elder without blinking. He saw the Yanjiao elder raise a finger and place it between Dian Dian's eyebrows. Dian Dian was also paying attention to the situation in her mindscape. The D Mountain totem was the same as the second drawing she made. On the other side of the human face, there were some new things. However, the fish mouth hadn't formed yet. The fish mouth hadn't completely swallowed the human face yet. At first glance, the flames around the totem looked normal. They were all blue. However, only Dian Dian knew that there were two different types of flames mixed together. Moreover, the D-fish's flames were the majority. They were even surrounding her. Otherwise, her condition wouldn't be so serious. However, the D-mountain's flames were also fighting back. It was just that they were inside the flames, so it wasn't obvious. At this moment, a ball of white flames appeared in Dian Dian's mindscape. When this ball of white flames appeared, the totem flames that were fighting fiercely suddenly calmed down. It was as if they were fighting and suddenly saw an outsider. They were so scared that they stopped fighting. Dian Dian's condition worsened because the two types of flames in the totem flames were fighting. Therefore, when the battle stopped, Dian Dian felt her body relax. The festering pain was still there, but it was much fainter. She didn't show any signs of pain. He Bian's anxious heart finally relaxed a little. Xiao Xian saw the totem in Dian Dian's mindscape. The D Mountain's totem flames were blue. They looked like seawater when they surged. The totem was very clear. He could see the fish mouth that hadn't formed yet. This meant that Dian Dian wasn't exaggerating. The totem flames looked like they only had one color, but Xiao Xian could clearly tell the difference. He knew which flames belonged to the D fish and which belonged to the D tribesmen. They were both blue, but in Xiao Xian's eyes, they were black and white. The situation wasn't good. The D fish's flames had already surrounded the D tribesmen's flames. On the surface, only a small portion of the D tribesmen's flames could be seen struggling. At this moment, Xiao Xian had a feeling that he could help. The ball of white flames flew towards the totem flames, but Dian Dian didn't feel any resistance. This surprised her. This was completely different from what the shaman had taught her. The ball of white flames approached the human-faced fish totem and entered the flames. It was like a bright sword that cut through the chaotic darkness. The D tribesmen's totem flames that had been surrounded by the totem flames took this opportunity to rush out. Chapter 723. The D fish's flames, which were originally attacking Dian Dian's mindscape and trying to devour the totemic flames, started to crack wider and wider. The D tribe's totemic flames were like warriors who saw the light at the end of the tunnel. They tried their best to break free. The battle started again, and this time, it was even more intense than before. Dian Dian had just started to feel better when a sharp pain came from her festering wound. It spread throughout her body, but she clenched her teeth and didn't scream. Was it because of the fire seed's rejection? No, it wasn't because of the fire seed's rejection. That ball of flames wasn't the reason for all this. Her condition worsened because the two totemic powers in her body started to fight again. In the D tribe, the difference between those who were sick and those who weren't sick, no, those who were seriously ill and those who weren't, was that the two totemic powers in the former couldn't coexist and were fighting against each other, like Dian Dian. The latter, on the other hand, were still in a stable condition, like He Bian and the others. Right now, the two totemic powers were fighting against each other, causing her condition to worsen. However, they weren't pushing her towards death. Instead, they were fighting back. They were fighting to keep Dian Dian away from death. He Bian, who had been staring at Dian Dian nervously, wanted to go closer when he saw Dian Dian in pain. However, Guizhe stopped him. Don't panic. It's not a bad thing. He Bian couldn't feel it, but Guizhe, as a shaman, could clearly feel that the D tribe's totemic flames were growing stronger. It's not a bad thing. But Dian Dian doesn't look like she's fine. He Bian panicked. If it wasn't for the fact that they had to merge their fire seed, he would have probably rushed up and attacked Xiao Xian. Wait there. Dian Dian suddenly said. Her voice was suppressed as if she was in extreme pain. However, she was determined and didn't allow He Bian to refute her. Hence, He Bian could only continue to stand there, anxious and uneasy. He kept staring at Dian Dian, afraid that something might happen. With Dian Dian's current condition, if she couldn't be treated, she would die in about 10 days. However, she still had 10 days. Every day counted. Could she not even last 10 days? However, no matter how anxious He Bian was, he couldn't go against Jian Dian's decision. After Jian Dian shouted, she didn't have time to pay attention to He Bian anymore. Right now, in Jian Dian's mindscape, the two totemic flames were fighting fiercely. What Jian Dian found strange was that the D tribe's totemic power in her body was much stronger than before. Other than when she first awakened, she had never felt such active totemic power. Ever since she had awakened, her totemic power had always been weak. She had been forced back by the D fish's totemic flames. But now, she was like a terminally ill person who had suddenly returned to her peak state. She was getting stronger and stronger as she fought. It was simply unbelievable. There was another thing that surprised Jian Dian, and that was the ball of white flames in her sea of consciousness. The ball of white flames was right beside her, but even though the D tribes and the D fish's flames were fighting fiercely, none of them attacked that ball of white flames. Logically speaking, if a power that didn't belong to her tribe entered her body, she would be strongly rejected. Just like the battle in her mindscape, that ball of white flames was also from another tribe, but it didn't reject her. On the contrary, Jian Dian even felt that when this ball of white flames existed, the totemic flames in her mindscape became more active. However, she didn't have the energy to pay attention to that ball of white flames right now. She focused all her energy on fighting back. The D tribe's totemic flames in her mindscape were one with Jian Dian. Jian Dian's thoughts could also affect the totemic flames. Ever since her illness had acted up, every time Jian Dian tried to use her totemic power, she would feel more and more pain. But this time, Jian Dian didn't care anymore. If she didn't fight, she would die. She might as well fight. As her totemic power increased again, the totemic patterns under her festering skin were no longer obvious. They were even hard to notice because they were covered by her wounds. However, some brown blood started to seep out of her festering wounds. This kind of scene had happened before. Every time he had a serious illness, this kind of situation would occur. However, compared to the past, the bleeding rate now was much faster. In the stone vat, the clear water at the bottom of the vat started to turn murky. Not only was the color of the water changing, but there were also small pieces of flesh falling off the festering wounds in the water. The three piranhas in the stone vat started to jump around like headless flies the moment the blood started to seep out of the vat. They banged against the walls of the stone vat, making loud banging sounds. Soon, the banging sounds became softer and softer. The time between banging sounds also became longer and longer until there were no more banging sounds. He Bian craned his neck and looked into the vat. All he saw were three fishes with their bellies turned up on the surface of the stone vat. Their blood-red eyes were wide open, and he could even see their fine teeth in their open mouths. Did they die just like that? Xiao Xian could feel the two powers in Jian Dian's body fighting against each other. He wanted to retreat and leave the battlefield, but the moment he did so, the D tribe's totemic flame in Jian Dian's mindscape became weak. When Xiao Xian brought the white flame closer, the D tribe's totemic flame became active again. After this happened twice, Xiao Xian knew that the white flame could make the totemic flame more active, and the totemic power would become stronger as well. The white flame came from another power in Xiao Xian's body. It was the light shield that enveloped the totemic flame. Its power was similar to the fire seed, but it was never rejected by another tribe's fire seed. This had happened in the drumming tribe, rain tribe, and other tribes before. Now, Jian Dian's body was proof of this. The totemic power came from the fire seed. If the fire seed didn't reject this power, the totemic power wouldn't reject it either. On the contrary, every time this power was used, no matter if it was the Yinjiao's totemic flame or the totemic flame of another tribe, it would become more active. Xiao Xian had some guesses as to how the rain fell on the rain tribe back then. How did the drumming tribe's water moon stones turn into water moon stones in Xiao Xian's hands? How did the water sun stones turn into water sun stones? All these questions were related to that power, but Xiao Xian still didn't understand what it was. Xiao Xian controlled the white flame and moved it closer to the D mountain tribe's totemic flame. With every inch it moved, the D mountain tribe's totemic flame became stronger. On the other hand, the D fish's totemic flame became weaker. Xiao Xian didn't dare to let the white flame rush into the totemic flame all at once. That might cause an uncontrollable situation. He could only test it out bit by bit. This white flame was like a giant hand pushing the tides of the battle. Under this push, the D mountain tribe's totemic flame started to fight back. As Xiao Xian pushed the white flame forward, the D mountain tribe's totemic flame also started to change. Retreat! Dian Dian suddenly said. She didn't want Xiao Xian to immediately retract the white flame. Instead, she wanted Xiao Xian to move the white flame away from the D mountain tribe's totemic flame. Now, the D mountain tribe's totemic flame wanted to play a game of cat and mouse. No, it should be said that this was Dian Dian's own plan. The D fish wanted to swallow her totemic flame, but now, with Xiao Xian's intervention, the situation had changed. Dian Dian decided to use the same method on the D fish's totemic flame. Xiao Xian could even feel the D mountain tribe's totemic flame in Dian Dian's mindscape. It was filled with anger and killing intent. The D mountain tribe's totemic flame wrapped around the D fish's totemic flame. Swallow! The D fish's totemic flame wanted to fight back, but the D mountain tribe's totemic flame was too strong. It didn't give the D fish any chance to escape. The D fish's totemic flame was like a predator that swallowed its prey whole. Xiao Xian didn't leave immediately. Instead, he continued to wait at the side. He waited for the D mountain tribe's totemic flame to strengthen until the situation was irreversible. At the same time, Xiao Xian realized that the totemic flame in Dian Dian's mindscape was changing. The D tribe and the D fish shared the same totemic flame because of the conflict between their fire seeds. Whoever had the upper hand would have the totemic flame tilted towards them. At this moment, on the human face, the two simple lines that represented the eyes started to thicken in the middle. It was as if the closed eyes were opening. The human face started to grow bigger. The fins around the human face started to sway, and the fish tail started to sway as well. Amidst the flames, the totemic flame, which was originally a fish swallowing a human face, started to change back to its original form. The human face grew bigger, and the fins started to shrink. The fish mouth started to appear on the other side of the human face, and it slowly disappeared like a weathered stone. The process of swallowing might take a long time, but the totemic flame was changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The swallowing process was accelerating. The D fish's totemic flame was taking back the power it had stolen from the D tribe. Chapter 724. When the D tribe's totemic flames finished devouring the D fish's totemic flames, Xiao Xian retracted the ball of white fire that had entered her mindscape. Xiao Xian retracted his finger and scanned his surroundings. The water moon stones in the room emitted a white glow. There was no light coming from the cracks of the windows. It's already night time. Xiao Xian was surprised. Yes, it's only been a while. Guizhe passed a small jade bottle containing pills to Xiao Xian. Although Guizhe didn't know what had happened and why it took half a day, it was undoubtedly exhausting. These pills were newly concocted after discussing with the Taiha tribe. They could quickly replenish totemic energy. It couldn't be compared to the fire crystals, but it was better than doing nothing. Grand Elder, how's Dian Dian now? He Bian walked over quietly and asked Xiao Xian in a low voice. The person in the stone vat had her eyes closed as if she was asleep. Only her breathing told He Bian that she was still alive. He didn't dare to disturb Dian Dian, so he could only ask Xiao Xian. She's fine. Xiao Xian popped a pill into his mouth. Although he was only a bystander, maintaining that ball of fire had consumed a lot of energy. She's fine. What do you mean? He Bian asked in a daze. If everything goes well, she should be able to recover for the time being. They didn't know what would happen to the D tribe and the D fish's fire seed in the future, so they could only talk about the current situation. After all, Dian Dian was the only one who changed. Even if she could recover, if they lost the battle for the fire seed, she wouldn't have a good ending. Recover? Are you saying that Dian Dian won't die? Will she really recover? He Bien couldn't control his voice, so he immediately lowered it and asked again, really? Okay, pay attention to her tonight. You can give her some of the medicine that Gui Zhe gave you. Xiao Xian checked the situation in Dian Dian's sea of consciousness again. There were no changes, and it was still the same as before. After devouring, it still needed time to adapt and integrate. Just like a python that had swallowed its prey, it also needed time to digest its prey. Xiao Xian did not need to do anything, nor could he help. After leaving the settlement, Xiao Xian briefly explained Dian Dian's situation to Gui Zhe. While Gui Zhe was amazed at Xiao Xian's ability, which was different from other Yanjiao people, he thought, it seems that since the totem has changed, it should be fine. However, Dian Dian is the only one who changed. The rest of the D people are still the same. Will they continue merging their fire seeds? It should be. Otherwise, there's no way to solve it. On the other side, after Xiao Xian and Gui Zhe left, He Bien found two people he trusted the most to take turns looking after the stone vat while the others stood guard outside. Inside the room, the light from the water moon stone allowed He Bien to see the situation in the stone vat clearly. Dian Dian's body was no longer bleeding. Most of her festering flesh had fallen off, and the water in the stone vat had changed color. It was also murky. The D people liked water, but they didn't like murky water. That was why He Bien carefully scooped the water out of the stone vat bit by bit. He also scooped out the 3 dead fish. Otherwise, they would rot and stink. Then, he scooped in new water. He tried his best to be as gentle as possible and not make any noise. He was afraid that it would affect Dian Dian's recovery. After changing the water, He Bien and another warrior carried the dirty water out. When they were a distance away from the room, the warrior called Du Lan asked He Bien worriedly, "Chief, can Dian Dian really recover?" "I don't know." That's what the Yanjiao Grand Elder said. Perhaps, the solution that the shamaness mentioned really exists. That's great. Our D Mountain tribe is saved. Looking at Du Lan's excited expression, He Bien had some things he wanted to say. However, he didn't dare to say anything. He had to wait for Dian Dian to wake up before making a decision. After all, the impact of what had happened was too great. Time passed by with He Bien's heavy heart. He Bien didn't sleep that night. The other D tribesmen didn't sleep either. They said that they would take turns to guard the place, but no one could fall asleep at a time like this. The 2 moons had disappeared, and the sun was starting to shine its light on the earth. He gently opened the window, and Yangguang's light shone in. The water moon stone in the room was no longer needed. He Bien put away the water moon stone and looked at the stone vat. Most of Dian Dian's body was submerged in the water. Only the part above her nose was exposed. Her breathing wasn't heavy, but it was long and steady. She didn't look weak at all. Also, He Bien could feel that Dian Dian's life force had become stronger. It was much better than when they first arrived. He Bien didn't know if it was because of the sun shining on Yangguang, or because of what he discovered, but his gloomy mood suddenly brightened up a little. Although the water in the stone vat had been changed, it had become murky again after a night. Her festering skin kept peeling off. He Bien didn't know how Dian Dian was doing, but judging from the fact that half of her head was above the water, she should be much better. At least the festering on her face had lessened. Although he couldn't see her original appearance, he could tell that her condition was improving. He Bien elbowed Du Lan and the others beside him and said softly, "Go get some water." The water in the stone vat needed to be changed again. The D tribesmen still loved cleanliness. It was just that the conditions on their way here didn't allow them to do so, so they looked like they were in a mess. However, they could tolerate it, but they couldn't bear to see Dian Dian suffer. She was the next shaman. The shaman was the core of the tribesmen. He Bien was about to get up and get some water when he heard the sound of water coming from the stone vat. He quickly looked over. Dian Dian, who had her eyes closed as if she was sleeping, finally opened her eyes. There was even a hint of surprise in her eyes. Dian Dian understood her own body's condition, so she could obviously feel that her pain had lessened greatly. Her body was much lighter now, and her weakened totemic power was much stronger after a night of fighting and devouring. After awakening, Dian Dian could feel the power of a totemic warrior once again. Of course, this was something to be happy about. However, Dian Dian soon noticed that something was wrong. He Bian and the others wanted to ask her something, but they saw the joy in Dian Dian's eyes turn into confusion, and then into shock. A childish scream came from the room, followed by the sound of water splashing and panicking. He Bian rushed out of his tent and ran to find Xiao Xian. He didn't know where Xiao Xian lived, so he could only ask the Yanjiao people around him. When he asked, his voice was trembling, and he even had an accent. The Yanjiao warriors listened a few times before they heard him say, "Great Elder." When Xiao Xian saw He Bian, he had just stepped out of the door when he heard someone calling him. He looked up and saw a figure running towards him like the wind. Then, with a plop, the figure knelt in front of him. "It's early in the morning. You don't have to be so formal," Xiao Xian said. "No, no." He Bian's legs were weak. He was too frightened. When he ran over, he had already tripped twice. One of the times, he even rolled quite a distance. The Yanjiao people who saw this scene started to wonder if the D tribe had trouble walking. He Bian was shocked and anxious. He couldn't explain himself clearly. After he got up, he immediately dragged Xiao Xian towards the tent. When Xiao Xian saw He Bian like this, he knew that something must have happened to Dian Dian. He sent someone to inform Gue Zhe and Gigu. Then, he followed He Bian to the tent. He wouldn't understand if He Bian explained himself, so he had to go and see for himself. When they arrived at the tent, Xiao Xian saw more than 20 D warriors waiting outside. Every one of them looked anxious. Some of them didn't know what to do, and some of them just stood there in a daze. It was as if they were too frightened. One of them wanted to drink water from the water tank outside to calm himself down. However, before he could bring the water to his mouth, he shook it off. The water in the ladle splashed out as his arm shook, but that D tribesman didn't seem to notice it. He continued to bring the ladle to his mouth. As they walked into the tent and towards the stone tank, Xiao Xian saw more than 10 D tribesmen standing there in a daze. He couldn't help but frown. What happened? Why were the D tribesmen so frightened? Dian Dian's life definitely wasn't in danger. If that was the case, He Bian and the others wouldn't be like this. There was only shock in their eyes, not sadness. There was the sound of splashing water in the room. It was louder than the splashing sound he heard yesterday. It didn't sound like a child's hand. Also, there was no laughter today. The atmosphere was strange. The splashing sound stopped when they sensed Xiao Xian's arrival. When he finally arrived at the door, there were a few D tribesmen standing by the door. They were drenched by the splashing water, but Xiao Xian didn't look at them. He quickly walked into the room and looked inside. What happened? Holy shit! Xiao Xian's footsteps stopped abruptly. His whole face seemed to be frozen, maintaining a look of shock. What? What? Ghost! Xiao Xian pointed at the stone tank. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Not long after Xiao Xian, Gigu, Gue Zhe, and the two retired shamans also rushed over. Gue Zhe wanted to see how Dian Dian's condition was after Xiao Xian's intervention yesterday. The other three were just curious. However, when the four of them arrived at the door and saw the situation inside, even the usually calm Gigu almost jumped up in shock. Dian Dian was lying in the stone tank. Her upper body was wearing the clothes made of fish skin she wore yesterday, but her lower body was a fishtail? Gigu really wanted to ask, "Are you a human or a beast?" However, he was too shocked and didn't know much about the situation, so he didn't say anything. Deep down, however, he was roaring. They thought that EC's half-beast human slave was already a novelty, but they didn't expect an even bigger surprise to be waiting for them here. Xiao Xian regained his senses. He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Mermaid? Mermaid? Jian Jian could face death calmly in the stone tank, but now, she was like a child. Her eyes were red and she almost burst into tears. She had only swallowed a portion of the D-fish's energy. How did she end up like this? Chapter 725. Xiao Xian didn't expect to see something like this. The D Mountain tribe doesn't react like this when you use your totemic power, right? Xiao Xian asked. No. Definitely not. He Bian shook his head vehemently. The D Mountain tribe had never seen anything like this before. They had never seen anything like this in their ancestors' records. At least, they hadn't seen anything like this in the records that had been passed down. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so scared. They often interacted with fish, but they never thought that they would really become fish one day. This is strange. After Xiao Xian calmed down, he walked closer to the stone vat to take a closer look. Jian Jian had completely lost her cool. She didn't know what to say. She could only wave her fishtail that shouldn't exist helplessly as if she was trying to make sure that this wasn't a dream. The slapping sound that Xiao Xian heard before he entered the room was the sound of Jian Dian's tail swinging. The water in the stone vat had also been flung out. There were water stains all over the room. Everyone who was guarding the room was drenched as well. But at this moment, no one cared about wiping the water off. They just stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. Let me take a look at your totemic power, Xiao Xian said. Jian Jian didn't reject him. She looked at Xiao Xian expectantly, hoping that Xiao Xian would be able to find the reason. Xiao Xian reached out his hand and placed it between Jian Dian's eyebrows. A white ball of fire entered her mindscape. The D Mountain tribe's totemic power had stabilized. There weren't any changes for the time being. It remained the same as when Xiao Xian left yesterday. The human face was very obvious in the totemic power. There was no fish mouth, and the fins were much smaller. That was why the human face and the fish body were the most obvious parts of the totemic power. Some of the lines on the human face had already disappeared. The eyes were slightly open, and the fishtail swayed along with the totemic flames around it. From the appearance of the totemic flames, it was obvious that Jian Dian's totemic power was very active. Try retracting your totemic power, Xiao Xian said. I can't take it back. I can't control it. This was also Jian Dian's dilemma. Since the beginning of the devouring yesterday, the totemic power had been released, and it had been active all the time. Jian Jian herself had not been able to control the changes of the totemic power. This time, even Xiao Xian was confused. After all, the D Mountain tribe's situation was unique. He couldn't use common sense to judge them. If one only looked at the totems and totem flames in the sea of consciousness, it should be in Jian Dian's favor, and this favorable situation was very stable. Finding nothing unusual, Xiao Xian retracted his finger and asked, "How do you feel now?" "Not so good." Jian Jian swung its fishtail and slapped the stone vat loudly. Anyone who had been a person for so many years would not feel good if they suddenly became like this one day. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you're getting better. Does your body feel strong? The slapping sound of her fishtail suddenly stopped. Because of the shock early in the morning, Jian Jian hadn't been able to calm down and check her body carefully. She only knew that the devouring was successful. However, after hearing Xiao Xian's question, Jian Dian's expression changed. She started to check her body's condition carefully. No one knew her better than her. The illness caused by the conflict between the two opposing forces was gone. Now, Jian Jian only had the totemic power of the D Mountain tribe in her body. Although the devouring power hadn't completely merged with the totemic power, this situation wouldn't change for the time being. It meant that her illness had been resolved at the source. Her illness was really resolved, but it brought about another problem. Her body was full of energy, just like when she had just woken up. She felt that if she dived into the sea now, she could dive to a deeper place and return unscathed. If she ignored the changes in her body, she would be very excited right now. I feel great. I want to swim in the sea, said Dian Dian. Hearing this, He Bian and the others finally felt a little comforted. No matter how scary the changes were, at least her illness was cured. She wouldn't have to die. Actually, you can try, said Xiao Xian. Whether the changes in your body are good or bad, you will know better when you move. We don't have an ocean here, but there is a man-made lake in the tribe. You can swim there. No matter how big the stone tank was, it couldn't move freely. Dian Dian agreed. As long as she moved freely, she would know the changes in her body. But, I want to swim in the water, but I don't want to go to the lake. I want to go to the river in front. Dian Dian's eyes suddenly shone brightly. She was muddle-headed just now. She was too frightened and didn't understand. Actually, being alive was already the best thing that could happen to her. So what if this change was shocking? As long as it didn't affect her movements, as long as she could return alive, as long as she could solve the D Mountain tribe's problem, this change was nothing. The river in front? You want to swim in the flaming river? Asked Xiao Xian. Yes. Dian Dian was determined. But the flaming river is very dangerous. There are many piranhas. Big piranhas. Gigu felt that this child was too brave. Just because she could play with small piranhas, it didn't mean that she didn't have to worry about big fish. Besides, there were other dangers in the river besides piranhas. The flaming river. Dian Dian confirmed. He Bian, carry me there. He Bian wanted to persuade her too, but seeing how determined Dian Dian was, he didn't say anything. Besides, he also wanted to see how Dian Dian would fare in the water. At most, they would protect her more. He Bian called 3 people over and planned to carry the large stone vat out. Let me do it, said Xiao Xian as he walked over. The 4 of them carried the heavy stone vat, and it was difficult for them to walk. It was fine on flat ground, but it was even more difficult when they were going down the mountain. If one of them was distracted and accidentally slipped, the stone vat might overturn. Xiao Xian decided to help again. He Bian wanted to refuse. He felt that there was no need to ask the Yanjiao people for help. However, when he saw Xiao Xian easily carry the stone tank on his shoulder and walk out, he closed his mouth and followed silently. Gui Zhe and the others followed closely behind. They also wanted to see if the D tribesmen could still swim freely. The D tribesmen were originally good at swimming. When Xiao Xian carried the stone tank down the mountain, he attracted the attention of many Yanjiao tribesmen. They didn't understand why the head elder was carrying such a huge tank. There were many people following behind him, including the chief, shaman, and elders. Oh, there were also the D tribesmen. What were they going to do? Some people wanted to follow them to take a look, but Gigu glared at them and they turned away. The morning sun had just started to shine brightly. The surface of the flaming river was wrinkled by the wind, reflecting the sunlight. The people guarding the flaming river were chewing on freshly roasted beast meat as they looked curiously into the distance. They saw their head elder carrying the stone tank to the riverside. Then, as if he was splashing water, he splashed, the person inside the stone tank splashed it out. As Xiao Xian moved, a figure flew out, drew an arc in the air, and jumped into the flaming river. Splat! The roasted meat in the mouth of the Yanjiao warrior guarding the riverside fell to the ground, but he didn't pick it up. Instead, he stared at the river. Did they see wrongly just now? Chapter 726. Beside the flaming river, Xiao Xian and the others stood on the shore. He Bian and the rest were prepared to enter the water to rescue Dian Dian. The person who entered the flaming river was already swimming underwater. Everyone on the shore could sense her movements. Dian Dian did not retract her totemic power, so even if they couldn't see what was going on under the river, they could still sense her movements. She's swimming, Gigu said. Yes, everyone on the shore could tell that Jian Jian had already entered the water and started swimming. Being able to swim meant that she could control her fish-like tail. She was like a toddler learning how to walk. At first, Jian Jian wasn't very familiar with swimming, so she swam very slowly. She surfaced a few times but didn't look like she was in danger. But at the same time, this also meant that she did not encounter any trouble in the water. Those piranhas did not attack her. On the contrary, at the place where Jian Jian entered the water, some piranhas that were close to the surface of the water swam away as if they were avoiding her. Gradually, the person under the water started to get used to it and her speed increased. The clothes Jian Jian was wearing were made from the skin of a sea fish. The D tribe's clothes could be used in the water at any time. Moreover, it was convenient for them to move around in the water. Even though Jian Dian's clothes were a little too big due to her illness, the fish skin clung to her body when she swam around, so the resistance she received was much lower compared to other clothes. Moreover, Jian Jian had also changed. Faster. Faster. Faster still. The school of piranhas under the water sensed the people approaching them, so they hurriedly scattered to the sides to avoid the people chasing after them. If it was any other person or beast that entered the water, they would definitely swarm over and bite them with their mouths full of sharp teeth. But now, they all chose to avoid them. Xiao Xian had seen this before when the drumming tribe's crocodiles entered the water. But now, this small figure with an unusual appearance made the piranhas react as if they had seen a crocodile. Their fish tails swayed vigorously, creating a vacuum in the water. When the person who caused this left, the bubbles quickly disappeared. The people who sensed the movement underwater almost simultaneously opened their mouths wide in shock. No matter how fast a person could swim in the water, their speed would still be limited by their body structure. However, Jian Dian's speed in the water had already exceeded that limit. No matter how fast the D mountain tribesmen swam, they would not be able to compete with Jian Jian. If He Bian and the others entered the water now, they would be left behind in the blink of an eye. How could it be so fast? He Bian murmured as he sensed the movements of the people under the water and looked upstream. Jian Jian was like an arrow shuttling back and forth in the water. It did not slow down at all as it swam upward, so when it came out of the water, it left an extremely long white line in the water. Paw! With a large splash, a fish half the size of a human was slapped onto the shore. Its mouth opened and closed as if it wanted to bite something. However, not long after it landed on the shore, it was knocked unconscious by the back of a knife. He Bian tossed the unconscious fish aside and waited for Jian Jian to reach the shore before deciding whether to stay or leave. The person in the water only came out of the water for a moment. When the water splashed, they could still see her tail coming out of the water. The scales on her tail were still reflecting the sunlight. Low and deep sounds mixed with a few sharp sounds could be heard, which came from the water. He Bian and the others heard this sound and had a strange expression on their faces. What's wrong? Did Jian Jian make that sound just now? Xiao Xian asked. Yes. When we D mountain tribesmen are in the water, we can't speak, so we make some sounds instead. It's just like how you whistle. Different sounds have different meanings. The sound Jian Jian made just now was telling us that she's fine. She's feeling very good. I see. Xiao Xian finally understood. He Bian thought that Xiao Xian was just thinking about the sound Jian Jian made in the water. However, at the same time, Xiao Xian also understood the origin of the D mountain tribesmen's unique accent. When the D mountain tribesmen were excited, they would unconsciously use that accent when they spoke. Some of the low and sharp syllables came from their habit of using the accent in the water. Over time, it might have developed into the unique accent of the D mountain tribe. If they heard a similar accent in the future, they would definitely know it was the D mountain tribesmen. Their accent was very special, and normal people would not be able to imitate it. The person in the water was still swimming quickly. He Bian thought that Jian Dian's movements would be greatly restricted when she turned from a normal human into a half-human half-fish. However, it seemed like this change made Dian Dian swim even faster. Even if He Bian was in his best condition, he would not be able to catch up to her speed. It was simply amazing. Also, when he saw Dian Dian's transformation, He Bian felt that half of her body was very similar to the D fish. When Dian Dian slapped the fish out of the water, other people might not be able to tell, but the D mountain tribesmen who were familiar with the D fish knew that the way she swam was very similar to the D fish. If it wasn't for Dian Dian's exposed upper body and only her tail, He Bian and the others would definitely think that it was a D fish. It was too similar. Dian Dian swam upstream. There was a stone bridge blocking the Muefei's way. The Yanjiao warriors guarding the stone bridge heard Xiao Xian's whistle from the foot of the mountain and looked around carefully. There seemed to be something approaching quickly in the water. However, Xiao Xian's whistle just now told them not to make a move. Hence, the people guarding the stone bridge could only stare at the water. It was getting closer. It was getting closer. The sound of water splashing could be heard. About 20 to 30 meters away from the bridge, the water suddenly exploded and a figure jumped out of the water. In the blink of an eye, it was already above the stone bridge. It drew a short arc and dove into the water again. The water splashed and reflected the dazzling light. Some splashed onto the stone bridge and made splashing sounds. What was that? Was it a human? I saw a human head. Bullshit, it was a fish. I definitely saw a fish tail. It was a human. I even saw hair. Fish. It was definitely a fish. You saw wrong. You saw a fish's whiskers. The Yanjiao warriors who were guarding the stone bridge argued. The person who dove into the water didn't jump over the stone bridge again. Instead, she swam back from the bottom of the stone bridge. Dian Dian was very excited. Although the river wasn't as comfortable as the sea, she was in a good mood. Ever since she got sick, she hadn't been able to swim so freely for a long time. She didn't want to go ashore yet, so she swam back and dove deeper into the flaming river. She wanted to play for a while longer. On the shore at the foot of the mountain, He Bian and the others were much more relaxed now. So what if they became abnormal? As long as they could survive and swim freely in the water, they could accept this little change. This was the first time He Bian smiled since he left the tribe. However, when he thought about the fire seed problem, his heart sank again. He turned to the Xiao Xian and asked about the fusion of the fire seed. Xiao Xian gave him a simple explanation. He Bian might not understand some things, but he would explain it to Dian Dian in detail later. However, I have to remind you of something, Xiao Xian said. What is it? He Bian asked. Are you planning to fuse with the D Mountain's fire seed first, then slowly consume the D Fish's fire seed for your own use? That's right. They took our fire seed's power, so of course we have to take it back. He Bian gritted his teeth as he spoke. His eyes were filled with hatred. If your plan succeeds and you take the D Fish's fire seed for your own use, then your situation will be very similar to Dian Dian's, Xiao Xian said. The two totemic powers in Dian Dian's body had already fused into one. The D Mountain tribe would also fuse the two fire seeds into one and take back the D Fish's fire seed's power. When that happened, it would be similar to the fusion of the two fire seeds. The totemic power was a form of the fire seed's power. When that happened, the D Mountain tribesmen would definitely be in the same situation as Dian Dian. When that happened, He Bian's eyes widened when he thought about it. Are you saying that we might end up like Dian Dian? I'm just saying that it's possible. No. I think it's really possible. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that what Xiao Xian said was very likely to happen. He Bian couldn't stay calm anymore. Although Dian Dian's speed in the water was much faster and she could dive for a longer time, so her advantage in the water was greatly increased. However, if the entire D Mountain tribe ended up like that, the scene would be too horrifying. He Bian didn't dare to imagine it. However, he wasn't the final decision maker of the tribe. He still had to wait for Jian Jian and the shamaness to make the decision. As he spoke, Xiao Xian's expression changed. He looked towards the river. The others also felt the presence of something approaching. However, other than Jian Jian, there was another splash, a wave rose and a figure about the size of a human was thrown onto the shore. Xiao Xian looked at the figure that fell from the sky and was stunned for a moment. The two huge claws and the hard shell with spots on it. Although it looked different from the shrimp in his memory, there were many similarities between it and the shrimp in his memory. When the thing that was thrown onto the shore landed, Jian Jian had already swum to the shore. It wasn't convenient for her to walk on land yet, so He Bian had to carry her into the stone vat. Jian Jian, what are you holding in your hand? He Bian asked. That fellow's. Jian Jian, who was lying in the stone vat, wagged her tail. She waved an especially thick and long tentacle in her hand and pointed at the thing that was thrown onto the shore. I found it at the bottom of the river. When I pulled it up, I broke a long strand of its tentacle. Chapter 727. Seeing that Jian Jian was safe and sound, He Bian and the others asked her about her condition. She replied, I feel great. He Bian told Jian Jian about Xiao Xian's concerns. Jian Jian, who was originally excited, fell silent. He Bian didn't disturb her. He knew that Jian Jian was thinking and weighing the pros and cons. He Bian waited for a while until the Yanjiao people asked when they were leaving. He leaned over and whispered, Jian Jian, should we go back to the house first? There was no reply. He Bian asked again, but Jian Jian still didn't reply. Xiao Xian walked over and reminded him, she's asleep. Fell asleep? He Bian squatted down and looked over. Jian Dian's head was lowered so he couldn't see her expression even when he leaned over. Now that he looked again, Jian Dian's eyes were closed and her breathing was calm. She's probably tired. Xiao Xian carried the stone vat and walked up the mountain. Jian Jian had just recovered from her illness and the two types of energy in her body had just merged. However, they hadn't completely merged yet, so it was difficult to control them. Moreover, she had been swimming excitedly in the river for a while and had used up a lot of energy. Now that she was resting, she was exhausted and fell asleep while thinking. He Bian had no choice but to wait for Jian Jian to wake up before asking about their next plan. Jian Jian slept all the way until the next morning. She was still in the stone vat. The temperature wasn't low at this time of the year and the D people were resistant to the cold, so Jian Jian even added some water to the stone vat. He Bian didn't know if Jian Jian needed water, but if it was a D fish, it would be better if there was water. Therefore, after Xiao Xian carried the stone vat up the mountain, He Bian added some clean water to it. Jian Jian slept in the stone vat for the whole night. After a night, the water in the stone vat was only slightly murky. It was much better than a few days ago. The ulcers on Jian Dian's body were also much better. When it was completely healed, the water wouldn't become murky again even if she lay in the water for the whole night. When Jian Jian woke up again, He Bian and the others were also resting by her side. Because they were sure that Jian Jian was no longer in danger of falling sick, their tiredness from the past few days was finally released. They rested and started to nap. When Jian Jian woke up, she felt relaxed all over. It was not the kind of relaxation one would feel after recovering from a long illness. Instead, it was a kind of carefree and open feeling. This should be the reason why she swam along the river yesterday. Thinking about the changes in her body, Jian Jian planned to look at her fish-like lower body. However, she soon realized that something was wrong. Xiao Xian was walking down the mountain, intending to check on the pterosaur. He didn't expect to be stopped by He Bian, who was chasing after him. There was someone sitting on He Bian's shoulder. It was Jian Jian. However, unlike yesterday, Jian Jian looked like an ordinary person instead of being half human and half fish. Grand Elder. Great Elder, something has happened again. He Bian huffed and puffed as he ran over. He didn't even have time to catch his breath. He pointed at Dian Dian and said to Xiao Xian, "Great Elder, look. She's changed again." He had already mentally prepared himself and accepted Dian Dian's half-human, half-fish form. However, he didn't expect her to change back the moment she woke up. Now, the D Mountain tribesmen didn't look for the chief or shaman. They only looked for the Great Elder. He Bian couldn't remember Xiao Xian's name. He only knew that if he needed help, he should look for the Great Elder of Yanjiao. Earlier, he went straight to Xiao Xian's place to look for him. When he heard that Xiao Xian had gone down the mountain, he didn't even stop and ran down to look for him. Now, Xiao Xian could only put the pterosaur matter aside and return to where the D Mountain tribesmen were staying. He looked at Dian Dian's mindscape. Everything was normal. It was almost the same as yesterday. The only difference was that Dian Dian's totemic power had been retracted. "Try using your totemic power again," Xiao Xian said. Dian Dian was worried that she would suddenly change back into her half-human, half-fish form. That was why she was wearing a fish-skin skirt. Only her feet were exposed. After Xiao Xian's suggestion, the totemic power on Dian Dian's body started to become active. Fish scales started to appear on her body, especially on her lower body. Although she was wearing a fish-skin skirt, her bent knees were still very obvious. However, as the totemic power became more active, the curves became smoother. Her feet started to change at a speed visible to the naked eye. The fish scales around her ankles and greenish-gray lines appeared on the soles of her feet. The color gradually darkened, and the shape of her feet started to change as well. Eventually, they became the two lobes of a fish tail. This. He Bian was stunned when he saw this. He thought that Dian Dian would always be in her half-human, half-fish form. Now, it seemed like she could still change. This meant that they had to re-evaluate this transformation. Perhaps, this transformation wasn't so bad for the D Mountain tribesmen after all. "How do you feel right now?" Xiao Xian asked Dian Dian. "Same as yesterday. I feel full of energy. I want to swim in the water." Dian Dian flapped her tail. She really wanted to jump into the wide water and swim to her heart's content. "Then can you retract your totemic power?" Xiao Xian asked again. This is very difficult. However, compared to yesterday, I can control it a little. But it will be very slow, Dian Dian said. In order to confirm whether the changes in her body were really caused by the totemic power, Dian Dian swam in the flaming river again. When she felt tired and exhausted, she went ashore again. Xiao Xian didn't need to carry the vats anymore. He switched to a large basket made of vines. He Bian and the others let Dian Dian stay in the basket while they carried her up and down the mountain. It was much easier this way. After Dian Dian finished her swim and was exhausted, she slept for the night. When she woke up the next day, she turned back into her human form. After repeating this process for a few days, they finally understood the crux of the problem. It was easy to release totemic power, but difficult to retract it. However, Dian Dian's transformation was undoubtedly caused by the totemic power. Therefore, if she could release and retract her totemic power like a normal person, she might be able to control both forms. He Bian understood this too. That was why he started to reconsider the pros and cons of this transformation for the D Mountain tribesmen. These few days, the Yanjiao tribesmen often saw a figure on the flaming river. She swam in and out of the flaming river like a water arrow. She even dragged one or two strange-looking river beasts up and gave them to the Yanjiao tribesmen to eat. The head elder said that those beasts were edible and tasted pretty good. The shells of the river beasts were also made into other things by the tribesmen. About 10 days later, the festering on Dian Dian's body had completely disappeared. She was also gradually able to control her totemic power. Although she wasn't very familiar with it yet, she believed that she would be able to control this transformation in a while. During this time, Xiao Xian also told Dian Dian about the things she needed to take note of when merging her fire seed. After her illness was cured and they found a way to solve the tribe's current problems, Dian Dian, He Bian and the others couldn't stay here any longer. They had to return as soon as possible. There were still schools of D-fish eyeing their tribe. They couldn't stay outside for too long. The D-mountain tribesmen didn't like other people interfering in their battles, so Xiao Xian didn't ask to go with them. He only said that if there was a chance, he would bring the fleet downstream. He hoped to see them at the D mountain near the estuary. If we succeed, we will go up the flaming river and visit the Yanjiao tribe again with gifts. Tian Dian stood on the Mu Fa and thanked Xiao Xian and the others solemnly. The shells and gemstones they brought would all be left in Yanjiao. If they won in the future, they would bring more treasures from the sea as thanks. If they could really solve the problem of the D-fish, and if the D-mountain tribesmen could also experience the same changes as Dian Dian, they wouldn't even need to use boats to travel upstream. This would greatly reduce the time they needed to travel upstream. Just think of Dian Dian's speed in the water. Chapter 728. The arrival of the D-mountain tribesmen didn't affect the people at the Flaming River trading point. Most of the travelers didn't even know that there was a group coming from the Flaming River. The D-mountain tribesmen didn't like places with many strangers, so they didn't go to the trading point. The Yanjiao tribesmen only talked about it for a few days before they gradually shifted their attention to other things. However, the D-mountain tribesmen's incident made Xiao Xian think a lot. Even after they left, Xiao Xian was still thinking about it. The D-mountain tribesmen's transformation was due to the fire seed. In the past, Xiao Xian always thought that the fire seed was only related to strength. However, the D-mountain tribesmen's incident told him that the fire seed's ability wasn't limited to that. The fire seed's mysteries were far beyond his imagination. The change in the fire seed could affect totems and the strength in the tribesmen's bodies. It could even change a person's form. Even if the D-mountain tribe's situation was special, it couldn't be denied that the fire seed played a key role in their transformation. Thinking deeper, if the fire seed could change a person's form, could it also change a beast's form? On the surface of the flaming river, the pterosaur swam on the surface of the river. It raised its wings and borrowed the strength of the wind to move its body like a sail. On a tree branch by the bank, the withered leaf birds that could already fly stood in rows on the branches and watched the river. They were waiting for the pterosaur to have enough fun and catch fish for them. If it wasn't frozen, the pterosaur wouldn't have lived in this era. There were no longer any dinosaurs in the forest and the sky was no longer the pterosaur's domain. The creatures that survived from ancient times, such as the crocodiles and other beasts and plants, only made up a small portion of the population. Of course, this was only what it looked like on the surface. What if the giant beasts that existed in the past didn't all go extinct? What if they turned into another type of creature? Humans could turn into mermaids and mermen. One type of beast could turn into another type of beast. The pterosaur was afraid of the fire seed. It might have been frightened by the fire seed before it was frozen. Then, did that mean that the fire seed had already started a large-scale transformation? Was that the reason why the pterosaur was so afraid of the fire seed? Too much time had passed. Xiao Xian could only guess what happened back then. He couldn't know the truth. As for the pterosaur that survived, it couldn't speak. Even if it could, it might not know much. The fire seed was indeed a mysterious thing. There was also the other power within Xiao Xian's body, the light shield that could bring out the white fireball. Where did the strange stone that brought him to this world come from? Xiao Xian sighed. It was such a profound question that he couldn't figure it out at the moment, so he decided not to think about it. Before the D-mountain tribesmen left, Xiao Xian asked them about the route from the seaside to here. He Bian couldn't remember most of the details, but there were many D-mountain tribesmen. Each of them remembered a little. Even though it wasn't much, it was enough to fill in the blanks on the map. They had a rough description of the dangerous areas and the tributaries. At least, when the Yanjiao people traveled downstream in the future, they wouldn't be too passive. When Dian Dian left, she took the big shell with her. They might need it on the way back. If Dian Dian suddenly turned into a half-human, half fish and couldn't turn back immediately, she could stay in the shell longer. At least, she could rest in the shell when she got tired of swimming. Most of the D Mountain tribesmen slept in shells. He Bien and the others didn't want Dien Dien to sleep on a wooden raft. It was uncomfortable to sleep on a wooden raft. It was better to sleep in the shell. Before they left, Dien Dien gave the 20 fist-sized pearls in the shell to Xiao Xian. These 20 pearls were placed at the bottom of the shell. There was a layer of fish skin on top, so when the shell was opened, Xiao Xian and the others didn't see the pearls. Those 20 pearls were carefully selected. They had a certain healing effect on ordinary diseases. When they were put in the shell, they probably wanted Dien Dien to feel better. Unfortunately, those pearls had no effect on Dien Dian's condition. Dien Dien had already recovered by the time they returned, so she didn't need the pearls anymore. Therefore, she gave all 20 pearls carefully selected by the D Mountain shaman to Xiao Xian as a thank you gift. The pearls glowed in different colors. They were very pretty. Xiao Xian didn't need them, so he gave them to Guizhe. Girls liked pretty things like this. Today, Xiao Xian went up the mountain to look for Guizhe with the second supplementary map. Guizhe was busy working in the medicine house. There was a bowl made of shells on the table. There was some white powder in the bowl, but Xiao Xian found the slightly bigger pieces familiar. Xiao Xian walked into the medicine house and saw Guizhe holding a large black pearl. He placed it in a stone mortar on the ground. The mortar was made of a rare stone. It was very hard and didn't affect the efficacy of the medicine. It had been used by generations of shamans to grind herbs. Now, Guizhe placed the large black pearl that was glowing with a halo into the mortar on the ground. Guizhe didn't need to say anything. One of the turtle's legs stepped into the mortar. There was a crisp crack. When the turtle's leg was lifted again, there was only powder left. Xiao Xian was speechless. Seeing Xiao Xian come in, Guizhe exclaimed excitedly, "These pearls are much more effective than shells." "That's great." Xiao Xian put the map in his hand on the table in the corner where there were piles of animal skin scrolls. Guizhe would sort the animal skin scrolls after she was done with her work. Guizhe was busy preparing the medicine. Xiao Xian didn't disturb him in the medicine house. When he came out, he saw Duo Kong, who had just returned from a hunt and was about to go to the trading point. "I heard that the Longboat tribe is preparing to go out to sea again." "No, I heard that Jing Luo got the news a few days ago." "They should have left already," said Duo Kong. "The Longboat tribe is planning to open up a sea route." Xiao Xian looked into the distance. That was the direction the Longboat tribe was going to go out to sea. With the merging of the fire seed, the tribesmen were able to move more freely. Their trapped ambitions were also upgraded. After the last voyage, the Longboat tribe had completely unleashed their ambitions. Xiao Xian wasn't surprised by their actions. As early as the last voyage, the Longboat tribe had been desperately learning the language and writing of the other side. It wasn't just the Longboat tribe. All the other major tribes had begun to infiltrate the other side. Was the war in the desert very intense? It was good to be intense, it made it easier to move. When the two sides were fighting fiercely, no one paid attention to them. They didn't pass by that side anyway. The Longboat tribe set off again, bringing the jade and silk clothing of the Mang tribe and Eight Limbs tribe to another continent. This time, their destination wasn't the mountains or forests, but a place with more people, such as a city. The Mang tribe's jade was of good quality and had beneficial effects. If they brought it over, the slave masters would like it. The spider silk clothing of the Eight Limbs tribe was also very rare. Rare things always had a higher status in the hearts of the slave masters. They liked to use rare things to prove their noble status. The Longboat tribe, Mang tribe, and Eight Limbs tribe hoped to use these things to exchange for more metal wares. The core seed only landed on that continent. Without the core seed here, the metal wares in their hands couldn't meet the demand. So they would use what they had to exchange for metal wares to achieve a higher value. Speaking of metal wares, Xiao Xian didn't go to the trading point with Duo Kong. Instead, he went to a mountain far away from where he lived. Few wild beasts came here. Those that passed by would deliberately avoid this place. There were people guarding the mountain. There were more people guarding it than the 1,000 grain gold at the farm. The security was tight, and there were many traps hidden in the forest. When they saw Xiao Xian, the vigilance in the eyes of the people guarding the mountain faded. Has everything been going well recently? Xiao Xian asked. Nothing out of the ordinary. 30 days ago, the forging room came and took away a batch of stones. The next day, they were replenished. No one went in to check for the past 30 days. The guard told Xiao Xian about the recent situation. There was a cave dug out on the mountain. The core seed was stored in the cave. The ores used to forge the metal wares were transported out from here. However, it wasn't very frequent. Every 30 to 50 days, they would come and take away a batch of stones that were ready to be forged. Then, they would replenish the stones that were already prepared. Xiao Xian came here because he remembered the crystals that were placed there. Back then, they had exchanged many large crystals from the drumming tribe. Xiao Xian asked people to send a batch of crystals in. Compared to other stones, crystals changed much slower. So before this, Xiao Xian didn't ask people to move the crystals out. Calculating the time, it should be enough. Chapter 729. After the flaming horns migrated here, they decided that this cave was the most suitable place to store the core seed after a discussion. It was neither too far nor too close to where they lived. It wouldn't affect the tribesmen's lives, but it wasn't too far away either. The seed affected both living and non-living things, especially those with weak resistance. People who hadn't awakened their totemic power couldn't get too close. Even powerful totemic warriors had to stay a certain distance away from the seed. Even if they used herbs to strengthen their resistance every day, they still couldn't withstand the seed's effects. That was why the guards were still some distance away from the cave. There were many traps along the way. Only those who were familiar with the layout could pass through safely. When Xiao Xian arrived at the cave, he didn't let the guards follow him in. Usually, the guards wouldn't enter the cave unless it was necessary. Every time they stood at the entrance, they felt like their bodies were on alert. For the Yanjiao who hunted often and had sharp senses, it wasn't a good feeling. If it wasn't for the fact that the seed was an important source of weapons, they would have stayed away if they encountered such a situation elsewhere. The guards already gave Xiao Xian the buckskin clothes. After changing his clothes, Xiao Xian moved the big stone away from the entrance, walked into the cave, and moved the stone back to block the entrance. The outside light was suddenly cut off, and only some wind blew in through the hidden ventilation holes, causing the airflow inside to flow. The water moonstones were much brighter than usual in this cave. Xiao Xian knew this from his time in the desert. This was the seed's effect on the stones. The cave was filled with the smell of death, as if warning all living things to stay away. This was why many beasts stayed away. Yanjiao spent a lot of effort to dig this cave. The tunnel was wide and tall enough for them to transport the stones. For other tribesmen, they had to rely on tools or a lot of manpower. But for Yanjiao people, if the stones weren't too big, they could carry one by themselves. A tunnel led directly to where the stones were placed. It was carved into a wide, circular field. For the seed, the Yanjiao people had almost emptied it. Pieces of carefully selected stone were placed neatly in a circle around the core seed in the center. The better the material, the shorter the time it took to change. The smelted material would be better too. Plus, the flaming horns were good at choosing materials. If they didn't have a core seed or a metal tool, they would still choose materials and grind them into tools. Today was different from the past. Now, everyone was choosing stones for the sake of sending them here. This way, they would be able to obtain better weapons. People always liked to change in a better direction. This was a necessity for survival. There were many paths between the stones in the center to make it easier for people to check. Every once in a while, someone would come over to check which stones could be moved to the casting room. With Xiao Xian's special vision, he didn't need to rely on the light from the water-moon stone to see the changes in the stones. In the past, the quality of the stones would be directly distinguished by light and darkness in the special vision. However, these stones that had been placed here for a long time had begun to change. The images that appeared were no longer uniform. Instead, they seemed to have been divided into sections with different shades of color. Only a special section was needed to forge the new bronze. The metal ores in the other sections may be precious, but at least for now, the flaming horns did not need them. Maybe in the future, when forging skills reached a higher level, they would shift their focus to the stone sections. Xiao Xian didn't look at the other stones. Instead, he went straight to where the crystals were. There was an area specially set aside to store the large crystals from the drumming tribe. At a glance, this area was the only one that was different from the other stones. At the time, Xiao Xian's idea was a whim. Originally, they wanted to store the crystals and trade them with the slave masters on the other side of the sea. After all, the people there preferred beautiful and rare stones. It was Xiao Xian who sent some of the larger crystals here. As for the smaller ones, some were stored. Just as Jing Luo and Duo Kong thought, some of them could be used for trade in the future. The rest was used by Xiao Xian to polish lenses. He made a magnifying glass for Gui Zhe to study herbs. He also made a few binoculars for everyone to keep watch and travel. When he came to the area where the crystals were placed, in his special vision, most of the crystals had changed. Only the surface didn't change much, but the insides were completely different. Especially the center, in Xiao Xian's special vision, it was as bright as the moon. Compared to the other stones, it was as dim as stars. This was also the reason why no one objected when he had people trade with the drumming tribe to place more crystals here. Under the influence of the core seed, these crystals underwent strange changes. Not every stone was suitable to be placed in the core seed's area of influence. Some stones, like jade, were not suitable. Their changes were too slow. If a jade was placed here and taken out after a few years, the changes might not be obvious. The better the jade, the slower the change. No one had the time to wait. What was even more strange was that Xiao Xian had also chosen some crystals from other places. Some of them were similar to the drumming tribe's crystals. However, after a while, they realized that the drumming tribe's crystals had the most peculiar and fastest changes. Perhaps the drumming tribe's crystals were not the normal crystals Xiao Xian thought. Since the drumming tribe treated them so specially, it seemed like they had their own special characteristics. There were too many stones that looked the same but were different in essence. It wasn't easy to tell them apart. Even Xiao Xian couldn't use his special vision to tell them apart. But now, he found a way to use the core seed to tell them apart. However, this method required a long time and couldn't be decided in a short period of time. It was rare to see a stone suitable for the core seed cave. Of course, the tribesmen wouldn't object to Xiao Xian's decision. Compared to trading crystals with the slave masters, they were more willing to create something more valuable for themselves. Up until now, Yanjiao had already obtained larger crystals from the drumming tribe. However, because they didn't know if the crystals were what Yanjiao needed, they didn't bring them all in. After all, if Yanjiao didn't need the crystals for now, they might as well rely on other stones. It would save them a lot of time and space. However, if they found out that the crystal contained something that everyone needed, and that it was more valuable than the other stones, and could bring more benefits to the Flaming Horn tribe, then the Flaming Horn tribe would transport all of their crystals here. Deactivating his special vision, Xiao Xian used the light from the water moon stone to look at the crystals. Most of the crystals the drumming tribe took out were colorless crystals, but now, the inside of the colorless and transparent crystals had changed beyond recognition. Of course, the most eye-catching was the crystal core. Inside the transparent crystal, the center was filled with all kinds of colors, as if the originally colorless crystal had been dyed into a colorful color. Some yellow, red, gray, brown, and other colors were scattered around in an irregular pattern, blocking the things inside, making it impossible for people to see what exactly was inside. The crystal core was small at first, but as time passed, it slowly grew bigger. Xiao Xian felt that the crystal core was about to grow, so he came here. He needed the core, not the colorful stones that surrounded the crystal core. The crystal core was the brightest thing Xiao Xian could see in his special vision. In his special vision, the brighter something was, the more precious it was. This was something Xiao Xian had learned from his experience. Since he didn't know what a crystal core was, Xiao Xian only picked the smallest crystal. When he picked it up, Xiao Xian's hand sank. Xiao Xian couldn't help but be surprised. Heavy. The crystal core had become much heavier. This wasn't just a small change. The change was too obvious. It was several times bigger than before. It was hard to ignore. Without Xiao Xian's permission, the other people who came in to move the stones didn't dare touch the crystal even if they were curious about it. They just watched from the side and reported to Xiao Xian when they left. So until now, no one knew that the crystal core was so heavy. This made Xiao Xian even more curious about what was inside the crystal core. Xiao Xian put the crystal core in the animal skin bag he had prepared and left the cave. He took off the white worm's skin coat and gave it to the guard. Then, he brought the crystal core to the forging room. The people in the forging room were busy forging weapons. They hoped that every Yanjiao warrior could have their own new bronze. However, there was a limit to the number of green-faced fanged beasts they could take each time. They also had to make sure that the green-faced fanged beasts were healthy. After all, they didn't know if there was an eighth green-faced fanged beast in this world. The forest of fearsome beasts was so badly damaged that they didn't know how many had survived. No one could be sure if there were any green-faced fanged beasts in this forest. However, everyone knew about sustainable development. This kind of thing couldn't be rushed. That was why the people in the forging room had some free time. During this free time, everyone would gather to discuss their recent discoveries and experiences. The flaming horns were already lagging behind the others in this area. Only through communication could they improve their skills. This was their only advantage. If they didn't improve at all, they wouldn't be able to face the other tribesmen. They might even be replaced by others. "Hey, Grand Elder, why are you here?" The people who were chatting saw Xiao Xian and quickly got up to greet him. "I brought you something." Xiao Xian took out the crystal core from the animal skin bag. Chapter 730. What's this? The people in the forging room immediately gathered around. Based on their understanding of Xiao Xian wouldn't give away an unimportant stone so easily. Could it be from there? An older middle-aged man pointed at the place where the core seed was placed. There was no need for him to explain. Everyone immediately understood. "I've heard about the changes there, but I didn't expect it to be like this." The people in the forging room rubbed their palms together. They weren't afraid of the changes. They were interested in all kinds of new changes. "Try it first." Xiao Xian handed the crystal to the elder next to him. "It's so heavy." The man's expression changed as soon as he touched the crystal. He frowned thoughtfully. The others couldn't wait any longer. Before the man could react, they all rushed over to try the crystal. "It's really heavy." "Great Elder, how did this stone become so heavy?" "Actually, the stone's weight will change when it's shipped over, but it's not as obvious." "This crystal is really strange," someone else said. The people in the forging room clicked their tongues in wonder. The elder turned to Xiao Xian and asked, "Great Elder, what do you mean?" "Cut it open and see what's inside," Xiao Xian said concisely. "Understood." The people in the forging room immediately perked up and brought out the tools they needed. Ever since the new bronze was produced, their tools had been upgraded as well. The outer layer of the almost transparent crystal shell wasn't thick, nor was it too hard. With the new bronze tool, the outer layer of the crystal was quickly knocked off. "Ha! What's this?" The people in the forging room looked curiously at the crystal core that had been taken out. There were many colorful crystals on the surface of the crystal core. They were harder than the transparent crystal shell on the surface. These were the crystals Xiao Xian saw earlier. These colorful crystals are quite pretty. Let's knock them off and put them away. Most of the people in the forging room came from the other side of the sea. They knew the value of these beautiful crystals, so after carefully knocking them off, they didn't throw them away. Instead, they put them in a box on the side. About half an hour later, most of the crystals on the crystal core, which was half an arm long and 1 palm wide, had been knocked off, revealing most of the crystal core's face. Black? Xiao Xian looked at the black object with a metallic luster and tried to guess what it was. Great Elder, there are still a lot of crystals that can't be knocked down. Do you think we should melt them first? Generally, the impurities in the ore would be removed during the smelting process, which was why the blacksmith thought of this method. Alright, you guys try it first. This piece of land was meant for testing, so Xiao Xian let them do as they pleased. At this time, someone came to look for Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian went out first. It was someone sent by Gigu to look for Xiao Xian. When he heard that Xiao Xian was here, he sent someone to inform Xiao Xian, but it was not urgent. He only asked Xiao Xian to go up the mountain when he was free. When Xiao Xian walked into the forging room again, the blacksmith had already placed the black crystal core on the furnace. However, Xiao Xian glanced over and asked the person next to him, "Are you using the same set of smelting tools?" Originally, those were all used to smelt and cast bronze wares. Now, it was a new and unknown thing. When Xiao Xian said this, the people in the forging room woke up with a start. Indeed, they were used to putting the ores they had collected into the furnace. When they were working just now, they didn't think that this might not be a material they had come in contact with before. However, they were too anxious to find out what it was, so they neglected this point. But, it should be fine, right? Just as they thought this, Xiao Xian shouted, "Get out of the way." Xiao Xian felt his heart skip a beat. He only had time to push a few people away, but he couldn't save the crystal core in the furnace. With a loud explosion, the roof of the forging room was blown off, and the blast from the furnace exploded in all directions. All kinds of tools were sent flying in all directions by the sudden impact, and dust and stone fragments flew everywhere. The people guarding the forging room were so scared that their hair almost stood on end. When they saw the situation, they ran over. They didn't know what had happened, but the people in the forging room were the ones who made the weapons for them. Nothing could happen to them. Moreover, the Great Elder was still there. In fact, small things happened in the forging room every once in a while. The craftsmen needed to improve the forging, and from time to time, they would get some inspiration, so it wasn't rare for them to make some noise. However, this wasn't a small noise. The room over there had collapsed. Also, something seemed to have flown out of it just now. They didn't care too much about it. Everyone who heard the noise rushed over to the forging room. The most important thing now was to make sure that the people in the forging room were still safe. "Great Elder! Great Elder, are you okay?" A person who rushed over asked anxiously. "I'm fine." Xiao Xian pushed the bricks off his body, got up, and patted the dust off the stone fragments. Then, he and the others dragged the people in the forging room out of the mess. Fortunately, Xiao Xian reminded them in time and pulled the people close to them away. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a worse result. Those who were lucky only had some scratches on their bodies. Those who were unlucky were hit by the quickly lifted tools and other things. Some had broken bones, while others had been stabbed. However, Xiao Xian gave them a cursory look. For the time being, they weren't in any danger. He ordered people to carry the more seriously injured people in stretchers for treatment. He also asked Guo Zhe to check if they had any internal injuries. Other parts of the tribe also heard the noise. Because they didn't know what was going on, someone asked with a whistle. The guard in charge of this area looked at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian waved his hand, indicating that there was no need to make a fuss about it. Understanding Xiao Xian's meaning, the guard blew the whistle. When the people in other parts of the tribe heard this, they felt relieved and went back to what they were supposed to do. After the injured were taken away, Xiao Xian looked at the forging room that was now beyond recognition. He rummaged through the mess, but didn't see the crystal core. He asked the others, "When you heard the noise, did you see anything else?" "This big black one." Xiao Xian gestured. The people who came over shook their heads. They were all worried about the people inside and didn't pay much attention. However, one of the warriors whispered, "I think I saw something fly out." "Fly out?" Xiao Xian asked. "Yes, it flew out directly from the roof. As for where it went, I don't know. It was so fast that I thought I saw wrong." Xiao Xian thought that it must be the black crystal core. However, it might not be easy to find it. "If you see it, tell me," Xiao Xian said and went to other places. He asked the patrolling guards to keep an eye out for anything suspicious that might have fallen. However, when Xiao Xian was walking towards the tribe's residential area, he suddenly heard the pterosaur in the surrounding forest cry out in surprise. Xiao Xian looked over and saw the pterosaur lying on a tree branch looking up into the sky, as if worried about something. Looking in the direction the pterosaur was looking, Xiao Xian saw something flying in the sky. Because it was so small, if it wasn't for the light, it wouldn't have been easy to notice. Even if there was a light, it would be difficult to see it without good eyesight. That was, thinking of a possibility, Xiao Xian looked in the direction the thing was flying in. The thing in the sky seemed to be falling rapidly. Xiao Xian switched to his special vision. In his field of vision, besides the sun, the thing in the sky was like the only starlight in the sky. It was extremely conspicuous. That was it. Xiao Xian blew the wooden whistle. The thing in the sky wasn't falling towards Yanjiao's headquarters, but on the other side of the river. It was very likely that it was near the trading point. After blowing the whistle, Xiao Xian ran towards the stone bridge. Before he went there, he hoped that the people at Yanjiao's trading point would be prepared to prevent others from snatching the thing away. Xiao Xian's whistle was relayed to the people at the trading point by the guards at the stone bridge on the other side of the river. The trading point was noisy, so perhaps the guards couldn't hear Xiao Xian's whistle clearly. However, when the people here relayed the message, they understood. Duo Kong and Jing Luo heard the noise and came out. They looked up at the sky. After all, the whistle could only convey a limited amount of information. Xiao Xian only told them to look at the sky. At this time, the thing in the sky had descended a lot. The people on the ground could also see the approaching fire in the sky. "What's that?" someone in the trading point exclaimed. "Is that fire? Fire can do that? It must be something good. Yanjiao's people are going over." Duo Kong personally led a group of people towards the place where the thing was falling. It was impossible to hide the noise from everyone. Moreover, after hearing the whistle, although the people from other tribes did not understand the content of the whistle, there would always be people who looked up into the sky. 1 spread to 2, 2 spread to 4. More and more people saw the fire falling rapidly from the sky. Curious people also followed them. However, this was Yanjiao's territory. They might not be able to snatch the thing away from Yanjiao. Most of them were just there to watch the show. In the city, EC, Wu He and the others had all sorts of guesses in their hearts. A fire falling from the sky was indeed very suggestive. Especially Wu He and the others. When they saw the scene, they immediately forgot about the pain and disappeared in a flash to grab the thing. What fell from the sky might be a treasure. The fire in the sky came closer and closer. Like a shooting star, it smashed into the ground not far from the trading point with a loud bang. Because of this, the noisy trading area fell into a momentary silence. What's going on? That thing in the sky, it fell. Scary, it's really scary. I don't know what it is. Why do strange things always happen in Yanjiao? The people in the trading point didn't have the guts to go out and take a look. They could only gather together and discuss. Some of the people who went out wanted to take the opportunity to snatch the thing away, but when they got there, they found that Yanjiao's people had already surrounded the area. They were filled with killing intent. A few people who wanted to snatch the thing away had already been killed. The smell of blood and the obvious killing intent woke up the impulsive people and made them stay away. In the sky, Wu He and the others saw that there was a hole where the Yanjiao's people were surrounding. Hot smoke was coming out of it. What a pity! Why did it fall in Yanjiao's territory? If it was anywhere else, Wu He and the others would still try to snatch it away. But here in Yanjiao, they thought about their experience of being captured. Although they were tempted, they didn't dare to make a move. Chapter 731. When Xiao Xian arrived, there were already quite a few people gathered there. He looked at the trading point and saw that some of the people who hadn't come out were standing on the rooftops, craning their necks to look out. Some of them even lowered their heads from time to time to talk to their friends. After all, things that fell from the sky were always mysterious and gave people endless imagination. "The Great Elder is here," someone from Yanjiao shouted. Wu He and the others had seen Xiao Xian come over, and with their previous experience, they hesitated and chose the latter. When Xiao Xian came over, he even raised his head to look at them. Wu He felt a chill run down his spine. Cha-Cha was playing in the forest, so there was no one in the trading point that could threaten Wu He and the others. If they hadn't seen Xiao Xian, Wu He and the others might have tried, but they still remembered Xiao Xian's slap. So, when Xiao Xian arrived, Wu He didn't need to say anything. The long-winged birds quickly flew up and away from the crater. When they saw Xiao Xian, the people surrounding the crater made way for him. Xiao Xian also saw the people from Taiha. They were people who stayed in the trading point to familiarize themselves with the environment. Because of the sudden situation, they came to help block the people. In fact, they couldn't see what was inside and were curious, but at a time like this, it was better to help an old friend. Where the crystal core landed, the ground was compressed at the moment of impact. Stone and soil flew everywhere, forming a crater. The surrounding vegetation looked like it had been burned. Some of it was charred black, and there was a lot of stone and soil on it. "Xiao Xian, what is this?" Duo Kong stared at it curiously. "Of course it's good stuff," Xiao Xian said. Xiao Xian's voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't too soft either. Those with good hearing could hear what Xiao Xian said. Among them, there were quite a few people from other tribes. When Xiao Xian asked the question, they all perked up their ears to listen. Xiao Xian's answer was the same as what they had expected. They couldn't help but think deeper and deeper. Xiao Xian glanced around and didn't say anything else. He had been in a hurry to get here and didn't bring any tools with him. He asked the people around him for a knife or spear to use first. The ground here wasn't too soft, and the crystal core wasn't too deep. Xiao Xian quickly dug it out. Perhaps it was because it had been blown up by the explosion in the forging room and then smashed down here again, but the shape of the crystal core was different from when it was first knocked out of the crystal. It was not as long, and its shape was irregular. Other than the shape, the most obvious change was its appearance. The messy crystals that were originally attached to it had disappeared. There were some patterns on the black crystal core that reflected a metallic silver light under Yang Guang's gaze. Because the crystal core wasn't too big, Xiao Xian asked someone for a beast skin bag after the temperature dropped. He put the strange crystal core inside. He didn't bring the crystal core back to the headquarters. Instead, Xiao Xian walked into the flaming river castle in the center of the trading point under everyone's watchful eyes. So many people had seen it anyway. It would be more suspicious if he tried to hide it. After Xiao Xian walked into the flaming river castle, the people outside couldn't know what was going on inside. They couldn't enter the flaming river castle, so they could only talk about it. "I think it must be a rare item. Didn't you see Yanjiao's Grand Elder come personally?" Those who had been in the trading point for a long time felt that their judgments were close to the truth. "Nonsense, of course it's a rare item from the sky." Unfortunately, I've never seen anything from the sky other than bird poop in my entire life. Some people in the expedition team sighed at their bad luck. Everyone else had found a treasure, but their expedition team had been traveling for so many years and visited so many places. They hadn't seen any treasures, but they had always encountered trouble. Comparisons were odious. I don't know why Yanjiao's luck is so good. Could it be that Yanjiao chose this place because they thought there would be good things here? I'm not interested in anything else. I just want to know what that thing from the sky looks like and what it's used for. I don't know. I'll go ask around. I think someone saw it before. It's a rock. Everyone in the trading point had their own guesses. Some people wanted to take out more resources to trade with Yanjiao for that thing from the sky. Unfortunately, Yanjiao didn't lack those resources at all. Want to snatch it? Yanjiao's territory was guarded by many people. Plus, more and more people from the Flaming River area were leaning towards Yanjiao. They were worried that they wouldn't have a chance to show their loyalty. If someone really wanted to make a move, someone else might jump out before Yanjiao could do anything. Plus, there was an unfamiliar Taiha tribe this year. It would be even more difficult for them to make a move here. EC, what do you think? Wu He asked EC when he returned listlessly. Although EC didn't know anything about divination, his predictions were sometimes quite accurate. If Wu He had listened to him last time, he wouldn't have been locked up for so long by Yanjiao. I only know of two things that come from the sky. One is the fire seed, but that's just a legend. I don't know if it's true or not. The other is the core seed, but those things are controlled by the people in the royal city, Wu He said. But the thing in Yanjiao's hands doesn't belong to either of them. That's strange. EC had been thinking. He could only make accurate judgments based on things he had seen before. However, he had never seen anything that fell from the sky. The only thing he was sure of was what Wu He said. It wasn't the fire seed or the core seed. Forget it. I still have a lot of things to settle. Because many people in the trading area were not good at math, and because of the frequent transactions, the volume of transactions had been increasing. This gave EC a chance to survive. As for Yanjiao's discovery of the meteorite, he didn't think it was that mysterious after all. Wu He saw that EC didn't want to talk about it, so he left angrily and went to find other people to gossip. At the same time, inside the Flaming River Castle, Duo Kong and Jing Luo were already surrounding Xiao Xian's black stone, marveling at it. Aside from the natural disaster, this was the first time they saw something like this. Could it really be some kind of treasure? Duo Kong even went over to pick up the stone for a closer look. It's so heavy. Duo Kong was surprised by the weight on his hand. It wasn't that he couldn't carry it. After all, this stone was only so big. It couldn't be that heavy. He only said it was heavy in comparison to other stones. Duo Kong tossed the stone and exclaimed, "Things from the sky are really different. What can it be used for?" Jing Luo looked at Xiao Xian, puzzled. "I want to see if I can use it to make weapons." "What are the characteristics of the weapons I make?" Xiao Xian said. "That's it." Zheng Luo agreed with the idea of making weapons, but this stone was too small. Was it enough? Moreover, although he didn't know much about forging, he knew that there would be a lot of trouble in the process of forging weapons. He also lacked experience. The charcoal, the temperature of the furnace, and so on needed to be tried again and again. No one knew which conditions were the best. Testing meant that they would need more of this stone. What could they do with this amount of raw material? Who said there's only one? Xiao Xian smiled. Hearing this, Duo Kang's eyes lit up. Could there be other stones from the sky today? You really think this is a divine object from the sky? Xiao Xian told them about the crystal core and the forging room. Zheng Luo and Duo Kong were stunned for a moment, then laughed. So that's why. If Xiao Xian didn't explain, they really would have thought it came from the sky. Tribesmen always respected the heavens, so of course they would look at things that came from the sky differently. But they didn't expect the truth to be like this. The people outside would never have thought that this stone would land in such a way. It was actually a mistake. However, they didn't plan to explain this misunderstanding. Zheng Luo and Xiao Xian had the same idea. They would just let people think that Yanjiao got a new stone from the sky. This would cover up the stone's true origin. They didn't want people to know about the secret of the core seed anyway. That's great. Of course, forging had to be done. So many people saw Xiao Xian carry the stone into the Flaming River Castle and come out empty-handed, so they knew that the stone was left in the Flaming River Castle. 2 days later, when the people at the trading point passed by the Flaming River Castle, they heard clanking sounds. It wasn't the sound of a stone being struck. Metal weapons? Metal weapons weren't rare anymore. Anyone with a bit of knowledge would know. Curious people also leaned over to listen. Could it be that the Yanjiao people were going to use that stone to forge weapons? Those who thought they understood the Yanjiao people's intentions shared their speculations with others. But in reality, the Flaming River Castle was just a smokescreen. The real focus was still in the forging room at Yanjiao's headquarters. The destroyed forging room had been rebuilt, and even more crystal cores had been hammered out. After the previous furnace explosion, everyone was even more cautious this time. Chapter 732. In the newly built forging room, there were no new bronze tools. At most, there were some ordinary bronze wares. Ever since the last accident, Xiao Xian and the others in the forging room searched for the cause of the explosion. In the end, they found that the reason why the crystal core had such a big reaction was because of the new bronze. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be any reaction when the two were placed together. However, under high temperature, the tools containing the blood of the green-faced fanged beast would react with the crystal core, such as a sudden explosion. In other words, the most important thing was the blood of the green-faced fanged beast. It could be said that there were traces of new bronze everywhere in the casting room where bronze ware had been forged. If that was the case, it would make sense for the furnace to explode. However, when forging the crystal core, the green-faced fanged beast blood couldn't be added. The people in Yanjiao were worried that the quality of the wares they forged wouldn't be too good. In their opinion, the green-faced fanged beast blood was a necessary material for good wares. However, Xiao Xian didn't think so. Even if the wares they forged weren't as good as the new bronze, it wouldn't be too bad. A new material was always exciting. Even if they were disappointed that they couldn't add the blood of the green-faced fanged beast, their anticipation for the new material didn't fade. The people who weren't seriously injured in the accident had mostly recovered in a few days. They were also totem warriors and had strong recovery abilities. These days, they had been studying the crystal cores with Xiao Xian in the forging room, trying to forge wares. They controlled the size of the furnace fire and even changed the charcoal made from wood. There were many differences between this and the bronze wares. Although it was troublesome, the people in the forging room valued the crystal cores more and more. When the crystal cores were forged, they would emit a lot of sparks. This was something they hadn't encountered before. Clang! 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 The sound of forging kept coming from the forging room. Outside the forging room, there was almost no other noise. Although the guards didn't know what was going on inside, they could guess from their past experience that the forging room was going to be different this time. The hammering sounds were different and lasted for a longer time. The sound of hammering echoed in the not-so-spacious forging room. Every time it was hammered, sparks would burst out from the point of impact, like fireworks in the night. Every time they breathed, hot air would enter their lungs. The people in the forging room had long been used to this environment. The clothes of the people standing next to them were soaked in sweat, let alone the people forging. At this moment, the person wielding the hammer was Xiao Xian. The embryo was so red that it looked like it was about to burst into flames. With each strike, it changed. Compared to its initial state, this embryo had shrunk a lot. The hammers used for hammering were made from the embryos that were hammered out from the crystals. Now, they were being used to hammer these red-hot embryos of unknown origin. Everyone in the room had a solemn and serious expression on their faces, as if their necks were fixed. They stood there in the same posture, their eyes fixed on the embryo that Xiao Xian was hammering. A pair of tongs clamped the red-hot embryo to prevent it from flying out when hammering. If it landed on a person's body, it would directly burn the place it came in contact with. The hammering hammer hammered down on the embryo. The muscles on the faces of the people who were glued to it trembled. Sparks burst out in all directions. It looked like Xiao Xian was going to smash the embryo. They couldn't help but think of the explosion that day. The heat wave and the bursting sparks, in addition to the metal clanging under the hammering, made their hearts tremble. Hammering was very taxing. The amount of force, angle, position, and so on had to be considered. One couldn't just swing the hammer blindly. Xiao Xian stared at the embryo. The bursting sparks were like a space-time tunnel, and he was in it. How long had he hammered? He couldn't remember, but it felt like 100 years had passed every day. As for the embryo that had been forged countless times, it gave off a sharp feeling even though it was still hard to tell what it looked like. This was just the feeling of the craftsmen in the forging room. However, they believed in this feeling. It was brought to them by experience, just like the intuition of an old hunter in the forest. It was precisely because of this that they were looking forward to the tool made from crystal cores. Hammering, molding, polishing. 30 days later, the hammering began. All the sounds in the forging room stopped. Xiao Xian's mind, which had been tense for the past few days, finally relaxed. Waves of exhaustion washed over him, and even standing was tiring. Xiao Xian didn't care if there was anything else on the ground. He raised his foot and casually kicked the ground. He sat down and took a long breath. At the same time, he looked at the saber in his hand, which was different from the other weapons he had used before. His heart suddenly filled with boundless emotions. After such a long time, he finally got a result. But he didn't know if this result would be satisfactory. It was a saber, about 4 fingers wide. It was narrower than the sabers commonly used by Yanjiao people, because Yanjiao people preferred to use wide swords and sabers. They tended to use heavy weapons. Although the one in Xiao Xian's hand wasn't as wide as the others, it was still quite heavy. If it was someone from another tribe, they might find it too heavy and inconvenient to use, but for the flaming horns, it was just right. Of course, if it was bigger and heavier, it might be more suitable for hunting. It was a habit. After resting for a while, under everyone's expectant gazes, Xiao Xian took the knife and opened the door to the forging room. Outside, Yang Guang's radiance shone brightly, reflecting a dazzling cold light on the saber. Everyone who saw it couldn't help but close their eyes. At the same time, countless goosebumps appeared on their bodies. However, this didn't mean that they were afraid. On the contrary, they were excited, as if a bucket of ice water had been poured on them on a hot day. This feeling wasn't bad. Perhaps, it would be a good saber. Xiao Xian took a deep breath. The temperature outside wasn't as high as inside, and it cleared up his muddled mind. Outside, the saber's appearance was even clearer. The saber's body was slightly black, and there were some darker lines on it that looked like flowing liquid. These weren't man-made, but formed by the saber itself. Under Xiao Xian's signal, the people next to him threw a stone. This was a common way to test the saber. The saber flashed, but it was even more dazzling under the scorching sun. With a crisp sound, the stone that was thrown into the air was split in two. The cut was smooth without a trace of stagnation. Good! When the people in the forging room saw this scene, they couldn't help but cheer. This was different from the previous tools. This was a new type of metal. If the new bronze couldn't be maintained in the future, they could use this as a replacement. Change it, Xiao Xian said, looking at the saber that didn't have any curls. The stone that was thrown up just now was a medium-grade stone. This was also the first step they used to test the saber. Next, a medium-grade stone was thrown up. Like before, it was also split in two. The third stone was a high-quality stone. Although it wasn't split in two as neatly as the previous two, the cut looked almost the same as the new bronze. Good! The second cheer was louder. Originally, they regarded this as a replacement for the new bronze, but now it seemed that this wasn't the case. Although it took a long time, that was because they were inexperienced at the beginning. However, as time passed, they gained more experience and improved their skills. The time needed would be greatly reduced, and they could even find more optimization methods in the forging process. However, in the short term, the people in the forging room would still focus on the new bronze. The people in the forging room gathered together to discuss, while Xiao Xian put his hand on the saber. This saber gave him a somewhat special feeling. It was very different from the new bronze. It seemed to be purer, without any other interference. The new bronze gave him the feeling that it contained a violent impact, as if several people were fighting in a room. However, this saber seemed calmer and more integrated. It didn't have such a chaotic momentum. Xiao Xian's mind flashed quickly. When he wanted to think more carefully, he was interrupted by a voice beside him. Great Elder! Great Elder, can we take a look? The people in the forging room gathered around and looked expectantly at Xiao Xian. Their eyes glanced at the saber in Xiao Xian's hand. With his thoughts interrupted, Xiao Xian couldn't continue thinking. He handed the saber in his hand to the people around him. It's so heavy. The people who received the saber were surprised. They liked this kind of heavy weapon. Compared to the new bronze of the same weight, this saber was smaller and more flexible. However, different people had different habits. He was just more inclined to this kind. Let me see. Let me see. Give it to me first. I contributed more to the forging of this saber than any of you. Hey, you guys watch. I cut my hand. In the struggle, the person who took the saber from Xiao Xian cut his hand. Bright red blood appeared on the saber and dripped down. When the people around saw this, they hurriedly wiped the blood off the saber with their sleeves. Be careful, you almost cut my hand off. You're too slow. You haven't moved your hands and feet for a few days. You're not flexible. A few people held the saber and chopped grass and wood. They didn't want to use the saber to test so many stones. Although they didn't bend the blade when they chopped the stones just now, they didn't want to. They were just doing it for fun. What they didn't notice was that Xiao Xian stood to the side and stared at the drop of blood on the ground. He then looked at the saber in the forging room, and then at the drop of blood on the ground. He seemed to be deep in thought. When everyone had finished their work, they reluctantly handed the saber to Xiao Xian. This saber was Xiao Xian's. After all, Xiao Xian had taken the main responsibility during the forging process. It was up to Xiao Xian to decide who to give it to. Moreover, Xiao Xian was the great elder. The people in the forging room wanted to ask something, but they saw Xiao Xian take the saber and cut the blade with his finger. He let the blood drip onto the blade. Before the blood dripped from the blade, he pressed his thumb on the drop of blood and then slowly moved it on the blade. Chapter 733. Xiao Xian's body was surrounded by fluctuations of power. The people in the forging room could feel it, but they didn't understand why Xiao Xian was doing this. Moreover, it wasn't the fluctuation of totem power. The people in the forging room were at a loss. They couldn't understand, but they didn't look away. They wanted to know what the great elder wanted to do with the knife, and why he dripped blood on it. As Xiao Xian's thumb moved, a long line of blood that wasn't too deep was left on the knife. But even if the blood wasn't deep, it still shocked the people who saw it. This shouldn't be. According to the strength of Xiao Xian's fingers, there shouldn't have been such a blood mark when he rubbed the knife. For example, when a few people were fighting over the knife, someone's hand was cut and blood dripped onto the knife. If he didn't use his clothes to wipe the blood off the knife, he could have wiped it off with his fingers. Even if he couldn't wipe it off, it wouldn't have left much of a mark. It wouldn't have been like the blood that Xiao Xian left on the knife just now. Where Xiao Xian's finger had touched, there was a blood mark that defied common sense. It was as if the drop of blood was no longer the liquid they were familiar with, but had become extremely sticky, like cooked grains. Only when one's finger pressed on it and slid over it would leave such a mark. But that was blood, not grains. It was too strange. The blood mark was only one of the reasons. What happened next shocked them even more. They saw Xiao Xian standing there. After wiping the blood on the knife to create a blood mark, he slapped his palm on the knife, right at the end of the blood mark. Whoosh, flames appeared on Xiao Xian's palm. Almost at the same time, the flames spread along the blood mark and burned. Burn! It burned! It burned! Everyone who saw this stared with their eyes wide open. There was no wood, no charcoal, but the knife suddenly burned. No, it wasn't an ordinary flame. The people in the forging room reacted quickly. They were very sensitive to fire. Whether it was an ordinary fire or a fire related to the fire seed, even totem warriors could tell, let alone them. But it was also because of this that they were even more surprised. It was the power of the fire seed. That's right, it was different from the primordial fire seed. It was similar to the power of the fire seed that had fused with their bodies, but it also had the aura and deterrence of the fire seed itself. But even if it was related to the fire seed, it shouldn't be able to ignite on a saber. How did the Great Elder do it? Sure enough. Xiao Xian whispered as he looked at the flames on his saber. The thought that flashed through his mind was when he was exploring the flaming river with his fleet. He saw the drumming tribesmen fighting against the fearsome beasts at the drumming tribe. At that time, the drumming tribe's net entangled the beast. Moreover, the net on top of the beast was all set ablaze. Later, Xiao Xian also tried it. At that time, Xiao Xian was immersed in a very mysterious state. It was as if he knew what to do and what the results would be. At that time, Xiao Xian used the same method to tie the beast's neck, but when Xiao Xian tried it again, he didn't succeed. First, he didn't understand the power at that time. He wasn't familiar with it, and the environment was different. Because of the drumming tribe's fire seed, they created a special kind of battlefield. It was filled with invisible forces that were more suitable for the drumming tribe to fight in. Without those conditions, it wouldn't be easy for Xiao Xian to succeed again. Second, and most importantly, Xiao Xian tried almost all the new bronze weapons. Xiao Xian remembered that when he tried to use his blood to ignite the new bronze weapon, he couldn't concentrate. It was as if there was a lot of resistance. Now, after comparing the new bronze weapon and the sword in his hand, Xiao Xian knew the difference between the two. It wasn't just the new bronze. The sword that Gong Jiaheng made for him had something else added as well. That was why compared to the sword in his hand, it wasn't pure enough for Xiao Xian to succeed in igniting it. There were too many disturbances. Perhaps in the future, when Xiao Xian was truly familiar with the technique and could control it well enough to ignore the disturbances, he might be able to ignite it. However, for now, Xiao Xian had only succeeded in igniting it on tools other than the worm's silk. After understanding the reason, Xiao Xian smiled. He retracted the energy supporting the flames on the sword. The flames that were burning along the bloodstains suddenly extinguished. The sword was still the same sword. There were no obvious changes. It was as if the flames didn't exist. However, the bloodstains on the sword were much lighter. Xiao Xian touched the sword and chopped a few more pieces of wood. He didn't notice any substantial changes. Only then did he relax. Perhaps it was because he ignited too little blood and the flames burned for too short a time. Or perhaps the sword's material was better at withstanding the flames. Either way, he couldn't see any obvious changes in the sword. After all, the nets and threads that were burned in the drumming tribe had all turned to ash. Xiao Xian couldn't help but think. He would have to be more careful when he tried to ignite the flames with his blood. He didn't want the sword to change. Xiao Xian left satisfied, leaving the people in the forging room standing there in confusion. The sword had been forged. This proved that the crystal heart could forge weapons that were as good as the new bronze weapon. This was encouraging, but Xiao Xian still had a question. He took an animal skin scroll to the Flaming River trading point to look for EC. EC was surprised to see Xiao Xian. However, when he saw what Xiao Xian wrote on the animal skin scroll, EC temporarily put aside his business and closed the shop. "You wrote this?" EC looked at the circles and symbols on the scroll. This was the E family's method of calculation. But other than EC, there was no other E family member here. However, when they were on the other side of the sea, EC already knew that Xiao Xian was very good at calculations. That was why he calmed down after a moment of shock. "You want me to solve this?" EC asked. "That's right. As for the reward, you can name it." These were some difficulties Xiao Xian had encountered in his calculation. He couldn't solve them yet because he used many of the E family's strange calculations. That was why Xiao Xian came to look for EC. "Reward?" EC thought for a moment. "I haven't thought of anything yet. I'll bring it up next time. If you bring up more than what I can do, I can't pay you." "Don't worry, I know that. My strength is that I can adapt to the situation and see things clearly." EC didn't say much. He still had a lot of unfinished business. He had to quickly solve Xiao Xian's problem. Once EC started calculating, he wouldn't stop easily. He held a pen in one hand and quickly tapped on it with the other. Xiao Xian took out a small piece of animal skin scroll. It looked much simpler than the dozens of pages of cloth accounts that EC had received. However, the contents inside were not simple. It was quite complicated. It was the essence of the E family's pride. It was just a small piece of animal skin, but the items listed on it made EC spend half a day calculating. By the time he was done, the sun had already set. "Here." EC wrote down the results of his calculations on the animal skin scroll and tossed it to Xiao Xian. He rubbed his eyes. "Remember the reward you promised." "Don't worry, I won't go back on my word." Xiao Xian took the animal skin scroll and left. This was only one step of the calculation. He still had to do the rest himself. Chapter 734. Inside the Flaming River Castle, the sound of hammering had stopped. As for what Yanjiao had made, no one knew. Yanjiao didn't want to reveal it either. Everything gradually calmed down and returned to normal. Occasionally, someone would mention the meteorite. Some people guessed that Yanjiao had made a divine weapon and was hiding it carefully, afraid that it would be stolen. Some people thought that Yanjiao must not have made anything. They might have even destroyed the meteorite. They just didn't say it out loud because of their reputation. No matter what everyone thought, the Flaming Horns remained silent. Even some of the Flaming Horn warriors were curious, but none of the chiefs seemed to have any intention to explain. If someone went up to ask, they would just stare at the person with a strange expression on their face. They wouldn't say a word. They would just stare at the person who asked until the person couldn't take the pressure anymore and stopped asking. At this time, inside the Flaming River Castle, Zheng Luo, who was guarding the trading area, and Duo Kong, who had just sent a batch of fearsome beasts over, were in a room inside the Flaming River Castle. They were looking at the newly forged knife. Zheng Luo even used a small copper pot in the room to test the knife. Looking at the copper pot that was split in half, Zheng Luo clicked his tongue in wonder. Only now did they know that other than copper, there were other types of metal that were suitable for making weapons. "What kind of metal is this?" Xiao Xian said the one before was called copper. "What about this one?" Duo Kong asked. Zheng Luo shook his head. "I don't know. But speaking of which, did the people who saw Xiao Xian go back to the secret room? He seems to be thinking about something." Duo Kong was also puzzled. In the underground secret room of the Flaming River Castle, Xiao Xian stared at the results of his calculations for the past few days. He circled one of the symbols with a pen. It was the symbol that was marked on the E family's ring diagram. Letting out a long sigh, Xiao Xian rolled up the animal skin scroll on the table and tied up the other pieces of cloth that were used as drafts. He would burn them later. He only needed to keep the final result. This conclusion was based on several assumptions. If these assumptions were true, then the main component of the crystal core should be iron. Although Xiao Xian had long believed that it was a metal alloy, he could not draw a conclusion because there was no theoretical support. Now, Xiao Xian was even more convinced. Ironware. Xiao Xian sat by the stone table, tapping his fingers on the table as he pondered. Their current technology was limited or they wouldn't be so popular with bronzeware. Even the Gongjia family, who were famous for their craftsmanship, mainly used bronzeware. It was clear that smelting ironware was not easy. Xiao Xian couldn't do anything about it, he wasn't a professional. Due to the core seed, there were many special things in this world that had to be done according to the current situation. However, the Yanjiao people really didn't have much talent in this area. They came into contact late and some of their thinking was already fixed. They also had poor foundations. It was too difficult to achieve anything in this area. They were training new talents but this would take time. Xiao Xian was still thinking when Duo Kong called him. "What is it?" Xiao Xian pushed the stone door open. "Someone's looking for you." Duo Kang's expression was serious. "Who?" "The Chonglis." "The Chonglis? Why were they here again? Weren't Wu He and the rest released as promised?" Wu He and the rest were much more obedient now. The Yanjiao people didn't capture them either. No matter what, there was something strange about this. The other party specifically asked for Xiao Xian. This was even more suspicious. When Xiao Xian entered the room, he saw a person sitting there with an "I'm not happy" aura. The person didn't look strong, even skinny. His gaze was as sharp as a knife. When Xiao Xian entered, his gaze was like a knife cutting back and forth. There was no murderous intent. However, this person who almost had impatience written all over his face was obviously in a bad mood. Otherwise, he wouldn't be acting like this. Xiao Xian was stunned at the door for a moment before entering. He ignored the other party's knife-like gaze and dragged a chair over to sit down. "I didn't expect the Chonglis leader to come here again." This person was the leader of the Chonglis, Su Li. Wu He told Xiao Xian his name later. Last time, because of Wu He, Su Li came here and agreed to Yanjiao's request to deliver a letter. They didn't expect him to come here again. If he wanted to steal something, he wouldn't appear here so openly and ask for Xiao Xian. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, Su Li snorted impatiently. "You think I want to come here?" Because they'd met before, Su Li didn't need to confirm his identity. He dug in his clothes and took out a cylindrical bronze object. Then, he threw it at Xiao Xian. "For you." Duo Kong and Jing Luo wanted Xiao Xian to be careful. They didn't trust the Chonglis and were wary of any tricks. Seeing their reactions, Su Li snickered but didn't say anything. Xiao Xian caught the cylindrical object and looked at it. He saw some cloud-like patterns on the surface and was surprised. "I think you know who this is." Su Li stood up. "I've brought the item. Let's go." The Chonglis were supposed to be free and unfettered, looking for fun everywhere. Since when did these people start treating the Chonglis as messengers across the sea? Yes, it was the Yanjiao who started it. They couldn't let this continue. But every time the messengers gave him a reason he couldn't refute. It was so frustrating. Last time, it was because of Wu He and the other little bastards. This time, it was because he owed Gong Jiaheng a favor. Gong Jiaheng had made him a handy tool but he didn't ask for anything in return. He only said he would ask Su Li for help if he needed it. He didn't expect him to be a messenger. As the leader of the Chonglis, although he had done a lot of bad things, he still kept his word. He had to keep his promise. Hence, he brought the item Gong Jiaheng gave him. It was precisely because of the anger in his heart that Su Li did not have a pleasant expression on his face this time. He hurriedly left, afraid that the flaming horns would make an offer that he could not refuse. Before Xiao Xian could speak, the Changli's leader's silhouette flickered and slid out of the window like the wind. When Duo Kong looked out, all he saw was a long-winged bird flying away. What is this? Who asked him to send it here? Zheng Luo walked over to Xiao Xian to look at the cylindrical object. Gongjia Hang. Xiao Xian showed Zheng Luo the cloud-like patterns on the cylindrical object. The cloud-like patterns weren't drawn randomly. It was a secret signal of the Gongjia family. There was a message hidden inside and it was hard to fake. The Chongli's leader didn't have to painstakingly make a fake pattern and send it all the way here. The cylindrical object was also exquisitely made. It must have been made by the Gongjia family. He opened the cylindrical object to reveal a scroll inside. The material was exquisite, in the style of the royal city. After reading the contents, Xiao Xian knew what Gongjia Heng meant. Inside, Gongjia Heng briefly explained the situation in the royal city. The gist was that the situation in the royal city was delicate because of the people in the desert. The second son, Ji Fong, had seized the throne and eliminated all opposition forces. Gongjia Heng didn't go into the details. His main point was that there were people he wanted to help among those who were to be eliminated. Because Gongjia Heng had helped Ji Fong forge swords, Ji Fong had agreed to exile those who weren't involved. Now that the situation was chaotic, Gongjia Heng was worried that the exiled people would be threatened by others. He didn't want those people to come to the mainland. At least they could have a better life with their forging skills and have a new start. To put it bluntly, what Gongjia Heng meant was that these people were all in the technical field, not politics. They weren't scheming and were rare talents. They were just ostracized because of the new situation in the royal city. They might even lose their lives. Would you take them in? Bullshit, yes. Of course. Xiao Xian was in need of blacksmiths. Since Gongjia Heng was willing to protect them, they must be capable. After all, Gongjia Heng wasn't close to the Gongjia family. However, he valued talents. Plus, if Gongjia Heng valued them, they wouldn't be scheming. Gongjia Heng said that these people had taken the desert route, avoiding the center of the war. However, he wasn't sure if they would pass through the desert successfully. If Xiao Xian wanted to take them in, he hoped to meet them in the desert. Inside the cylinder was a small bronze oval ball, half the size of a fist. When he opened the ball, there was a curled-up flying insect inside. It looked like a wasp, but there were some differences. Its wings were longer than its body, but they were soft and flexible. When it curled up, it wrapped around its body. According to Gongjia Heng, this flying insect had a very sensitive sense of smell. Similar to the Bai Luo, it was trained to track. When the environment wasn't good enough for it to survive, it would enter a state of suspended animation. Only when the environment recovered would it be released. However, there was a time limit to this as well. At most, it could last for a year. Some lasted for a short time, depending on the individual. Not long after Xiao Xian opened the ball, the dead insect began to move its legs. Xiao Xian quickly closed the ball again. He hadn't started tracking yet, so he couldn't let the insect out. Plus, this place was far from the desert, there was no point in letting it out. What if it ran away and disappeared? Xiao Xian didn't know what it ate. Gongjia Heng didn't mention it either. He probably forgot. It was better to wait until they reached the desert. Xiao Xian, what do you plan to do? Zheng Luo had read the contents too. To be honest, he was tempted too. These were the Gongjia family. If they hadn't encountered such a situation, they wouldn't have this opportunity. However, the desert was said to be very dangerous. Was it worth the trip? Xiao Xian put the scroll into the cylinder and the small ball into it, then he covered the cylinder with the lid. Yes, of course I'm going. Yanjiao lacks blacksmiths too, especially with the new metal products. If we rely on ourselves, we won't be able to develop much. It's better to leave professional matters to professionals. It's more efficient. Plus, I've been planning to go to the desert. His decision wasn't just because of Gongjia Heng's letter or the rumors about the strange people in the desert. It was because he sensed movement from Sapphire. Chapter 735. Xiao Xian had decided to go to the desert, but the Yanjiao people would not let Xiao Xian go alone. Plus, they were there to recruit people. If the target was someone else, Yanjiao would not care so much. However, this was the Gongjia family. Especially the Yanjiao people from the other side of the sea. When they heard about the Gongjia family, their eyes lit up as if there was a mountain of treasure. They would not let go of this opportunity, especially when they had discovered a new type of metal. They needed people in this field to speed up their improvement. After experiencing the benefits of the new bronze, Yanjiao people valued excellent tools even more. According to Gongjia Heng's letter, there should be about 10 people coming. Perhaps only 1 or 2 of them were important while the rest were apprentices. However, Yanjiao did not mind. These apprentices were still apprentices of the Gongjia family and had much more experience than Yanjiao craftsmen. When Gigu, Ao and the rest heard the news, they all had the same decision. Take them all. Take as many as you can. As for whether they could be trusted, they would bring them back first. If they were not trustworthy, then don't blame Yanjiao for being ruthless. It was not good to bring too many people to the desert. Too many people would make them a big target and it would not be a good place to hide. They were only there to recruit people, not to join the war. Plus, Yanjiao could not afford to send too many people. In the end, Xiao Xian decided to bring 100 people. These people were carefully selected. Duo Kong wanted to join but Ta wanted to go too. According to the old rules, one of the 2 team leaders had to stay in the territory. The last time Duo Kong went out to sea, because it was about the people from Taiha, Ta and the others didn't know them, so he didn't have any objections. But this time, Duo Kong and the others didn't know the people they were going to pick up. Since everyone wasn't familiar with the people they were going to pick up, Ta had something to say. In the end, Duo Kong stayed in the territory while Ta went to the desert. It wasn't going to be an easy task this time. One of them was the legendary monsters in the desert. Even though Rock Hill City's main target was the seaside, no one knew how many of them were eyeing other parts of the desert. Secondly, Xiao Xian knew that other than the threat of Rock Hill City, there were other uncertainties. Why did he say that? If Gongjia Heng could ask Su Li to deliver the letter, why didn't he ask Su Li to deliver the person directly? After all, the Chonglis had long-winged birds that could fly long distances. Perhaps the Chonglis had their own safer flight route. If the Chonglis could help, there wouldn't be so much trouble. However, the reality was that Heng did not do that. Or rather, Heng wanted to but the Changles did not agree. Based on Heng's letter, they could guess the reason behind this. The Changles were unwilling to help because they did not want to cause trouble. There were other people on the other side of the sea who were also keeping an eye on the target. After all, he was a Gongjia member. If Yanjiao wanted to recruit him, why didn't the others? The people on the other side were even more aware of the Gongjia family's capabilities. Other than that, there might be people who wanted to kill him. Although the new king had agreed to banish the target, who knew if there were other orders behind the scenes? Delivering the letter would not attract attention but transporting the person would be a huge target. The Chonglis did not want to cause trouble. They set off from Yanjiao towards the desert. The closer they got to the desert, the more they felt a deathly stillness. Back then, the desert was called a dead land but there were still traces of human activity near the edge of the desert. Small to medium-sized tribes like the Rain tribe lived there. Now, the Rain tribe had moved away. Perhaps the other tribes had left too. Perhaps they had disappeared for other reasons. Anyway, when they came here again, they had not even set foot in the desert. The weather here is still so bad, said Tua. Years ago, when Xiao Xian, Tua and Lei Di came here and rested at the Rain tribe, they had also encountered sand and dust storms. Now that they were here, it seemed to be worse. If this continues, the desertification will worsen and the desert will expand faster. Xiao Xian pointed at the ground beneath his feet. This wasn't like this before. Although there were no forests, at least there were some weeds. Now, there are only sand and rocks. The place where the Rain tribe used to live has all turned into sand. Lei remembered the first time he came to the desert. The Rain tribe's decision to move was the right one. After the Rain tribe left, the weather became drier. Without the Rain tribe, there was less rain. During the disaster, much of the desert disappeared. If this continued, it might not be as big as before in 1,000 years, but it would definitely be much bigger than the desert now. Xiao Xian left 50 people outside the desert while he brought the remaining 50 into the desert. They had 4 spiritual rain stones. The Rain tribe would not trade them away. Even though the people of the Rain tribe no longer needed the stones to collect water, the stones were symbolic to the Rain tribe. Especially after the migration, it was difficult to find any more spiritual rain stones. The ones in their hands were even more precious. Now, there were 4 spiritual rain stones. One of them was given to Xiao Xian by Yanjiao and the other 3 were rented from the Rain tribe by Yanjiao. For this, they even paid some materials as the rental fee. This was for the sake of Yanjiao. After all, the Rain tribe was now on Yanjiao's side. If it were someone else, the Rain tribe would never lend out their spiritual rain stones, let alone 3. He kept one for each of the 50 people outside the desert. Outside the desert, the weather was better than inside the desert. The rain stones could gather water droplets more efficiently too. However, once they entered the desert, the rain stones would not gather water droplets as quickly. That was why Xiao Xian brought 3 rain stones. He kept one for himself and gave the other 2 to Ta and Xiang Chen. They were divided into 3 teams. If they split up, they would be responsible for the water supply for their subordinates. The dry and hot wind mixed with sand and dust hit their faces. It was not comfortable for people who were used to the wet forest. Xiao Xian and the others covered their mouths and noses with cloth and walked forward on the sand. Today's weather was not good. Not long after entering the desert, there was a sandstorm. Xiao Xian found a place to rest for a while. When the sandstorm stopped, he opened the cylinder and took out the small oval ball. He twisted it open. The thumb-sized flying insect that was curled up into a ball moved its legs after a short while. Then, the pair of membranous wings that were tightly wrapped around its body also loosened. It stretched its body and flapped its wings, flipping its body over. Its 2 long antennae were propped up and swayed. Perhaps it had just woken up or it was not used to the desert environment. After the insect flipped over, it rested in the oval ball for a while. Then, it used its developed upper jaw to scrape the inner wall of the oval ball. So the food is here. Xiao Xian picked up the other half of the oval ball. There was indeed some waxy material on the inner wall. When Heng locked the insect inside, he must have thought of the possibility of this happening. After eating and waking up, the insect used its forelimbs to flick its antennae and flapped its wings to fly. "Follow it," said Xiao Xian. The insect did not linger in the same spot. Instead, it flew in one direction. This meant it could find its target here. Chapter 736. The continuous sand dunes blocked their line of sight. All they could see was the sand on the dunes being blown up by gusts of wind. He was surrounded by yellow sand, and there were no other green plants. In fact, he couldn't even see any plants. Not even a single one of those powerful plants in the desert could be seen. A man in ragged clothes climbed up the sand dune step by step. He was a tall young man with broad shoulders and a strong body. The muscles on his exposed arms were taut. He dragged a simple stone hammer in one hand. At first glance, it was obvious that it was made on the spot. The stone hammer was not decorated, nor was there a hole. Instead, it was a stone and a stone stick. It was tied together with a very tough vine in the desert, and there were even strips of cloth added to it. The crisscrossing wounds on his exposed arms had already closed. One could clearly see the coagulated blood mixed with sand and dust. With every step he took, he could feel the stinging pain from the wounds all over his body. However, after getting used to it, he became numb and gradually ignored the pain. Not far behind him were a few people with unkempt hair and dirty faces. The color of their clothes was unrecognizable. Their lips were cracked due to lack of water and they were slightly pale. Their eyes were blank as they mechanically followed the person in front of them. If they had a choice, they would not even want to breathe. The air was too hot and dry. The wind carried the scent of death and despair. "Duran, do you see anything ahead?" a slightly older man asked. His voice was hoarse and sluggish, and every single word was spoken with great difficulty as if it was squeezed out slowly. The person who had climbed up the sand dune used the stone hammer to support himself. Most of his body weight was on the stone hammer to lighten the load. He looked into the distance. He was originally carrying a sword in his hand. That sword was the most successful weapon he had ever made. Craftsmen always liked to carry their outstanding work with them. It was also a display of their abilities. However, in this place, those outstanding results had become something that attracted danger. Until now, the only thing he could carry was a simple stone hammer that he would not even spare a glance at in the past. Hearing his subordinate's question, Gongjiaren shook his head and dragged the stone hammer down. The people who had a glimmer of hope were once again filled with a deathly stillness when they heard this reply. They had been walking in this desert for 17 days. After living for so many years, when had they ever been in such a sorry state? This was the first time they had encountered such hardships. Back in the royal city, when they said they were part of the Gongjia family, people would naturally rush over to give them gifts. They had slaves to serve them and all they had to do every day was forge. They did not have to worry about anything else. But now, they regretted it. He regretted not learning more survival skills, regretted not following the right person, regretted taking this step. If he had stayed in the royal city and chosen another path, would it have been better? 10 of them came together but one of them was shot dead when they crossed the sea. No one knew where the arrow came from. Fortunately, Gongjiaren was vigilant enough to lead the group out of harm's way. Otherwise, more people would have died. But after stepping into the desert, they realized that it was even more difficult. They managed to evade their pursuers and Rock Hill City members, but the desert was a dangerous place. Of the remaining 9 people, 2 had been eaten by desert beasts and 1 had betrayed them by stealing Gongjiaren's sword. He probably wanted to use Gongjiaren's sword to seek refuge with the desert bandits. Yes, other than Rock Hill City members, there were a few scattered factions in the desert. Some were formed by former slaves while others were controlled by escaped slave masters. Now that Rock Hill City had changed their target and ignored them, these small factions had a chance to catch their breaths. These people did not dare to provoke Rock Hill City but instead, they killed and robbed others who passed through the desert. As the 2 continents neared each other, many people came from the other side. They wanted to cross the desert from a place far away from Rock Hill City but it would make things easier for the desert bandits. The desert bandits did not want to get too close to Rock Hill City. In the 17 days in the desert, they had seen many skeletons buried in the sand. No one knew who they were or where they came from. Along the way, they had seen a group of desert bandits. They buried themselves in sand and hid behind sand dunes to avoid danger. Now, there were only 6 of them left. If only we could find a water source now. A person slightly younger than Gongjiaren licked his cracked lips. Seeing that everyone was in low spirits, he took a deep breath and forced a smile, comforting them. There will be a turn for the better. At least we're still alive. Ah! One of them groaned helplessly as if he had a toothache. He threw away the stone in his hand as a weapon. Because of hunger, thirst, and the difficulties along the way, even if he wanted to roar to vent his anger, he could only shout weakly like a sigh. I'd rather die than continue to walk in such a place. Die! As soon as he finished, he felt something was wrong beneath his feet. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Although they didn't have much experience in such an environment, after so many days, they had developed a sense of vigilance towards danger. "Watch out!" Gong Jiaren shouted. A sand lizard suddenly leapt out from the sand, biting the legs of the person who was about to retreat and dragging him down. The others did not have the time to sigh and lament, hurriedly hugging the person's upper body. 2 of their companions had been eaten by sand beasts, and one of them was dragged down like this. It happened so fast they could not pull him away. Although the sand lizard had no teeth, its jaws were very strong. The person could not kick his legs away. The more he struggled, the tighter the lizard's jaws became. It even pulled backwards, as if trying to snatch its prey away from its companions. "Ah!" The person who was bitten cried out in pain. This was not the weak sigh from before, but an even more miserable cry. He did not doubt that if this continued, his legs would be torn apart. Bang! A stone hammer smashed into the lizard's head, making a sound like a hard object colliding. A palm-sized piece of scale on the lizard's scale-covered head was smashed off. Blood flowed out and its jaws loosened. The person who escaped the beast's jaws ignored the pain in his legs and hurriedly retreated, searching for the rock he threw down. They did not have any weapons, so they could only pick up some rocks to use as weapons, or some animal or human bones they saw along the way. The others also threw stones at the sand lizard or used sharpened bones to stab the sand lizard. Unfortunately, the sand lizard saw that the situation was not good and wanted to escape. Another hammer came down, and the airflow from the hammer made a whistling sound as it hit the sand lizard's eyes. A sound like gravel grinding came from the lizard's mouth. Its retreating head was smashed to the side. The others hurriedly followed, smashing and stabbing the lizard's injured head. After they were out of danger, they realized that this was food that they rarely saw. Everyone stared at the lizard with a fierce green light in their eyes. Finally, after a small part of the sand lizard was forcibly pulled out from the sand, it died under the joint attack of the 6 people. Gong Jiaren fell on his butt, panting heavily. After smashing the lizard 3 times, he had exhausted almost all his strength to pull it out from the sand. It wasn't just Gong Jiaren, the others were also sitting on the sand, too weak to stand up. However, if this lizard was not dealt with quickly, it would attract other sand beasts. Hence, the 6 of them did not have time to rest. Gong Jiaren crawled over and drank the lizard's blood. He did not know if the blood was poisonous, but he had no choice. The blood was thick with a fishy smell and there were many grains of sand. They could not care less as they all crawled onto the lizard's dead body, licking its blood and flesh like other desert beasts. They were forced to do so by survival. Rustle, 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 the sound of sand sliding could be heard. The 6 of them looked around vigilantly. With one look, their pupils shrank and their faces turned pale with fright. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A total of 5 lizards emerged from the sand and surrounded them. The lizard just now had exhausted them. Although they drank some blood, they could not recover in such a short time, let alone 5 lizards at the same time. It's over. That was the only thing they could think of. What should we do? One of them trembled. His face was covered in blood from licking the lizard's blood. When the wind blew, sand stuck to his face. He could no longer see his face clearly, only his terrified eyes. What else could they do? They could either wait for death or fight to the death. These were their only 2 choices. Run? With their current strength, could they outrun the lizards? Gong Jiaren closed his eyes, gripping the stone hammer tightly. They had no way out. Well, they had no way out when they were in the royal city. It was Gong Jiaheng who told them to run this way. That was how they managed to survive for so long. They had wasted so much of Gong Jiaheng's energy, but in the end, they still could not escape. Since they could not avoid death, they had to fight. Gong Jiaren opened his eyes abruptly and looked at the approaching lizards. He dragged the stone hammer and stood up, wiping away the blood around his eyes to avoid interfering with his vision. Ren, the person lying next to the dead lizard, wiped his face when he saw Gongjia Ren's reaction. He picked up the rocks and bones beside him. Although they knew the weapons in their hands were useless against these lizards, they had no other weapons. It was better to have something than to be empty-handed. If they could not survive, they could end their own lives. Gongjia Ren rushed to the front as he watched the approaching lizards. His eyes were filled with determination as he roared. The lizards that were closing in on Gongjia Ren turned and ran. Gongjia Ren, who had already raised his stone hammer, everyone else, they looked at the other lizards surrounding them. They had all run away, running as fast as they could, as if they were running for their lives. Boom! Sand exploded somewhere on the ground. A lizard was sent flying, rolling a few times in the air. A figure rushed out from the sand, glowing blue under the scorching sun. What? What a big worm! You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.